All right. First clap. 1, 2, 3. Okay. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of True Crime and Cocktails. It's ya bitch, Christy Oxborrow, and with me, as always, the love of my life, the wind beneath my wings, the Reba to my McIntyre, Miss Lauren Ash. How you doing?
I'm fabulous. How are you doing?
I'm not great.
Oh, I was also fully lying. So I feel like, we're on the same page.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's been a week. And I know I'm fairly certain I said that last week. But I didn't know what this week had in store for me.
Sure.
It turns out it meant my youngest got a bit of a stomach bug.
Oh.
So he was down for the count for a few days. And then everything was fine for a day.
Sure.
And then the 11-year-old went down and is still down to this point, missing school, which is a travesty for him because he loves to go. And just when you're like, okay, this feels like a lot of things going on, then I end up having to have an almost hour-long phone call with a bank because it seems some naughty person online has stolen my credit card information.
Oh, God.
Yeah. My husband and I have a joint card, or have a card that we share, and then I have a separate one.
Mm-hmm.
On the one we have together, my husband had gone to order something and the card got declined. And he's like, that's weird. There should be tons of room on it. So he looked at it and he was like, that's weird. And he's like, what did you buy from there? I'm like, I've never heard of that. Why? He's like, well, it shows a $300 and some purchase from this store. And I was like, I've never heard of that. So he starts scrolling back and there's an identical purchase from that same store again days before. And I was like, also not me. So I'm like, because it's my card that seems to be the one compromised, I have to be the one to call. So I phone. I get into it. I had a very, very lovely woman who every few minutes would go, thank you so much for your patience. I'm so sorry this is taking so long. And I would respond with, thank you for your patience. This is a nightmare. In the end, she found 18 charges.
Wow.
3 of them alone were $1,000 worth of charges. My favorite moments were we had to go then painstakingly through every single charge to make sure, because she's like, sometimes they use a small one to like test the card, right? And so she's like, okay, we're going to find this. Okay, there's one for Apple. And I was like, no, that's me. I have a monthly one that comes out. She's like, okay. There's a higher one for Apple. It's like a little bit more. And I was like, I have this game that I play. I bought in-game money. And she's like, understood. We all do it. I love that. I also felt the need to give her a reason why I had these charges, which it doesn't need a reason. And then she was like, oh, okay. I see one here. I bet this one's also fraud. It's for this place called Landscape. And I went, oh, no, that's Chinese food. It's delicious. And she's like, fair enough. And then she goes, oh, no, here it is. I'm seeing a lot of charges for 7-Eleven. I'm like, no, that's us. It's
Ma'am,
almost daily.
This is starting to feel like a shaming.
Yeah, it got to a point where I was like, oh, no, no, we go a lot. And she's like, oh, more than fair. Okay. What about this one? Like, she was so convinced. There was like some sort of surgery place in Texas. There was a couple of Australian stores. There was like Michael Kors was a store that had a charge pending. A $500 and some charge was pending on the card at that moment. So I'm like, this can't get worse. This can't get worse. So she finds all these charges. She's like, there's 18 currently. So I'm like, okay. And of these 18, all of them, I don't understand the wording she used, but whoever had the information used each of those times charging my card to open a window so that they could access my information. And she's like, I've closed the windows. And I was like, okay.
That sounds terrifying.
Oh, it gets worse.
Oh.
She asked if I share the card with anyone or if it's just me. And I was like, no, it's mine and my husband's card. And so then, of course, I had to keep coming into my husband's office and be like, hey, did you charge this for whatever? And because I couldn't say for sure or not unless I talked to him. And of course, he's working. It's a whole thing. But I mean, there was also my favorite moment where she was like, oh, so your husband has a monthly thing that comes out for a Patreon account. And I was like, how far into this are we going to go, Christy? Are you going to openly be like, yeah, actually, that's me. That's my husband being supportive. But I was like, no, we won't get into it. And I just went, yeah, that checks. That is him. But then she's like, so you and your husband, are you planning to travel anywhere soon? And I was like, no. And she's like, oh, well, somebody has put a travel request on your card. And I was like, that's not me. And she's like, okay. But when you called in on September 7th, I'm like, I did not. And she's like, well, somebody called in September 7th and changed the email address on the account so that they could try and access my online banking. So I was like, awesome. That was not me. I said, I don't really use this card because I have another one that I use. So I'm like, I don't use this card very often. So I have no idea where or when this situation happened, but it's been a real eye opener. And then I realized that card, which has now been canceled and a new one's coming, and I have to deal with, are they going to take away these charges that are for thousands of dollars that were not us, or what's going to happen? I'm going to find out in a letter when they send that to me in a few weeks.
They're saying you're going to find out in a letter if they're going to take the charges away? They have to.
Yes.
It's fraud. They have to.
We'll see. It was to say it was a nightmare. Like everything she said, I was like, this is the worst. This is the worst. And she's like, yeah, change. She's like, you're going to want to change all these passwords for your like email addresses, all of this. So I've done all of that. And then I realized that credit card is also linked to my PayPal account, which is linked to my bank account. So I had to go through painstakingly every single charge in there to make sure they were all me. And it's just been, and then I had to make sure to take the card off of there. And it's just not been great.
I'm so sorry. That's such a nightmare.
It's just, who saw it coming?
See, what my problem is that my cards have all these things where it's like, I try to make a luxury purchase because I'm living my best life. And none of them will work. They shut the card down. You try to make one big purchase and my cards get shut down. And then I have to have them like make a phone call to me like, was this you? And I'm like, yes, it was me. Yes, it was me. Which again is fine. I'm obviously happy to go through that or whatever, but I don't understand why. I mean, all companies I feel like should be doing that. If it has to be difficult for me to luxury shop, it should be difficult for the thieves.
Yes. Oh, this whole thing became a situation of like, I know they didn't steal my identity. They stole just, my card number. But I was like, is there a way we can find out who this is? And I can be like that episode of Friends where Monica goes to find the woman who stole her identity.
Yes.
So I could just like wander around and be like, hey, what are you buying?
Did she tell you what the email address was?
She did not, no. But it was also just like do you have possession of the card? I'm like, I do. So they got my number from somewhere. So then it's like, what site did I have my card on that they...
Well, listen, I also don't want to, I'm going to preface this by saying I am not slandering any businesses. And I am not suggesting that any businesses are involved in anything untoward.
Of course.
But I have also heard that some stores like 7-Elevens some of their machines, they'll have people come in to do work on them, and they put these things in, they gather information, they come back, they take it out, they move along.
See, and that makes sense to me. The thing is, I don't use that card there. That's the other joke. I don't really use that card anymore.
Well, then how are there all the charges for 7-Eleven on the card?
That it's when he does it.
Yeah. Well,
and that's the joke. I was going to be like, Lori, hun, you think there's a lot of charges there? You should see my other credit card and my debit. Like, you wouldn't want to see that, Lori. If you thought that was a lot, Lori, bless her heart. She was very lovely. And just every 10 minutes, thank you so much for your patience. I'm like, what am I going to do? You're the one helping me and going through every purchase and being like, did you buy from Adidas? I'm like, I did not. Did you buy from this skincare place? I did not. Landscape, what's that? Chinese food, it's delicious. That was me.
I have to say, I got a credit card stolen once, and they ran up a $200 bill at a McDonald's.
Oh,
and I was
can I see that receipt?
I know. I was like, I want to see how that was done, because I'm all for it. But if it were me throwing a party, but that feels difficult.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. There's truly nothing more stressful. I have dealt with similar issues in the past, and there's a special place in hell for the credit card scammers. There really is. It's such a because it's one thing because it feels violating and all of the above, but it's the time. It's like, I don't have time to deal with this. And now I have this thing that is going to require my time now and my time ongoingly to deal with this. And that makes me crazy.
Yes. And I'm so fortunate, and I see that I am, to be in the situation where having that card canceled in that moment did not affect me. I know that I lucked out because I wasn't using it as much, and it's still a pain in the ass to having gone through that and going through everything. But I get that I'm very fortunate, but it's like, I don't believe you should do this to anybody. But if you're going to do it to somebody, Bezos has so much money.
Oh, I know.
Credit card.
I feel like too, but I have some questions for your credit card company. Like, why would a surgery center in Texas not flag them that maybe there's some fraud going on here? They need to have better fraud alerts. Right? Down here, it's all fraud alerts. Almost everything I buy sets off a fraud alert.
See, that's
literally
weird.
If I drove an hour out of town and I used my card anywhere, I will literally get an alert that's like, you're not where you normally are. Is this you? For a small purchase.
Interesting.
Yeah, they're serious about it. They're serious about it in the US.
Well, and what kills me is there was 3 charges to the exact same place at the exact same time of day for the exact same amount of money 2 days apart. Like, there was a purchase, 2 days, a purchase, 2 days, another purchase. That wasn't a problem to them. They were like, that feels normal.
What was the company?
Adidas.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, that's no. But of course, my husband saw it, and he saw the first charge and just assumed I'd bought something for like the kids for sports or something.
Right.
And this, folks, is why people in relationships should communicate. I'm not suggesting this is on him. This was on us for both not being more vigilant about looking into it. But 18 charges in the last 2-3 weeks on that card. And it's like, holy shit. And I went, wow, this person's having fun, huh? like it got to a point where I was just so mentally beaten down by it. Every time she would mention a new one, I would write it down. I was taking notes to be able to relay it to my husband after. And it's like, oh yeah, in the end, my husband's card was not compromised. It seems fine. He'll continue using it. Mine is shut down. They will, that closed everything. They will send me a new one. They will also send me a letter in 2 to 3 weeks when they're done looking into this fraud. And I was like, and the whole time sicko over here. The whole time, all I could think of was, if you could just tell me who this person is or give me a hint.
I know.
I'll use it as an episode.
Yep.
Who's the victim?
We'll find him or her.
Her name is Christy Oxborrow. Yeah.
Well, listen, I know that I also said I was lying when I said I was doing well, but I feel like now my complaint is so minor. I just stepped in poop. I stepped in poop, and Peaches had a rogue poop in the house I didn't see, and I tracked it through the whole house. But good news, only on the carpet. And then it happened. It happened again. So it's yeah. She's leaving just the landmines. She's very turned around these days. She's yeah. But anyway, I've got an appointment tomorrow with the vet because I'm like, I just gotta make sure everything's good. But the point being is that's just a little bit of feces and nothing some Clorox and elbow grease can't fix. You know what I'm saying?
Look. Speaking of elbow grease, I spent my afternoon cleaning cat pee out of my entire basement, so I understand.
Yeah, you're you're worse off than me. Well, listen,
no, everything's relative. We're all living in our own fresh hells. The thing is, all you can do is laugh at this point. Yeah. Again, I'm that card not being usable isn't going to hurt me, and it's fine. Yes. So in the end, we've caught it, and hopefully it's over, and that's it. But I just now need my children to feel healthy.
Yeah.
And for my cat to stop peeing. I have taken them to a vet recently because they had their yearly shots. And I brought up to the vet, it was any concerns, because they always ask any concerns or anything. And I was like, this one won't stop peeing. Like, she goes in the litter box, but then a lot of times just goes throughout the basement. And so it was, well, we should check and make sure it's nothing like physical. And she's like, and I was like, because if it's not physical, then it's just sass. And she's like, then it's attitude. Well, the vet confirmed Evie Oxborrow has an attitude problem. Perfectly healthy, nothing wrong with her, just anxiety and a lot of pee. So it's like we've tried her on different litter, we've tried different litter boxes, we've tried all of these things, and it's just such a nightmare. We had a couch in the basement, and we had cats prior to these cats, so we think maybe that couch still smelled like the cats, and that was causing her an issue. That couch has now been removed from my home.
Yeah.
I paid a lovely company here in town to haul it away for me. And now I'm in the process of scrubbing down that entire basement. And our next step, if this still doesn't work, is trying them on a different food, which Cheddar will hate because Cheddar, my other cat, she loves her food. And she's not going to like this new food. The new food, it's for stressed cats, essentially is what it is. Also in my basement right now is a diffuser.
Yep.
To help. And if that works, we're going to get a diffuser for upstairs and keep those cats nonstop diffused.
Yep.
Anything. And I was like, I would get the anxious cat that needs a diffuser.
Dazed and diffused.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Had to go there.
God. Well, with the weeks we've been having.
Yeah.
What are you drinking over there?
You know what? I've only got a water and a Diet Coke going, but at the break, I'm planning to pour myself a glass of something. As you know, I get slurry when I drink and I'm reading, so I'm going to wait till the first break, and then I'm going to dip in. What about you?
Well, first of all, I like that reward-based system.
Yeah.
If I can make it to the half.
Yep.
Drink. I like that a lot.
Yep.
I'm just doing a water, and I got myself a Slurpee.
Good for you.
This evening because I want it because I go to 7-Eleven often. But I've wanted one for days, and it's just been a comedy of errors. I went to get one days ago, and like the machines were down, and that's just kicking me while I'm down. And so I was like, I guess I'm not getting one. And I was going to get one earlier, but then I was so tired from cleaning the carpet, and it's just been a lot. So
yeah.
Yeah. So today I was like, tonight, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to do that because I'm not going to do booze today just for the sake of I have to be up early tomorrow because I have a delivery that's coming to my house that will require me to move furniture around.
Listen, I mean, good on you. I'll drink anytime, any place. So I don't have those boundaries or standards.
Look, if you're going at the half, I might go at the half. I don't know.
Never say never, baby.
Yes. Oh, God. Look, I was informed prior to this evening, prior to this record.
Yeah.
Oh, that you have a lot of information.
Too much.
For me this evening.
Yeah, too much.
I also love when I keep referencing night and how it's tonight and this evening.
Yep.
When so many of our lovely listeners probably listen to this during the day.
But maybe that takes them away to another place. You know what I mean? Like it takes them away to like,
yeah,
it takes me away to a better place, and I know that everything.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Whereas I took that as take me away. Who is that? To a secret place? Yes.
Yeah.
Fuck, who is that? Oh, I see her. Yeah, isn't she the pocket full of sunshine? I gotta love and I gotta zone my own. Isn't that also her?
Yep.
No.
Is it Dido? No, that wasn't Dido.
I was gonna say Ellie Goulding, but I don't believe that's right either.
No.
Oh, is she Natasha Bedingfield?
Could be.
Oh, her brother's
you're
hot.
correct. You're correct.
I think they're brother and sister. I don't remember his name. He had a real slapper in the
That sounds like you're talking about his wang. He had a real slapper.
Thank you so much for wang. Look, I love us.
Same.
That's where we're at.
Yep,
that's where we're at. I think everyone knows just about where our energy is at.
Yep. Yes.
This evening.
Yes.
So today we are talking about the McDonald's massacre.
Yes.
And I will say it, I had never heard of this until you'd mentioned it to me. That you were like, I found this. And so I'm on board.
Yes.
So let's see what she's got for us this evening.
Please.
Around 4 p.m. on July 18th, 1984, 41-year-old James Oliver Huberty entered a busy McDonald's in San Ysidro. Okay, there we go. California, carrying 3 guns and a bag of ammunition. He opened fire on the people both inside the restaurant and in the parking lot. He managed to kill 21 people and injure an additional 19 before being shot to death by a SWAT team sniper. Huberty's massacre lasted over 77 minutes. So how did police allow this unrelenting attack to go on for so long? Were they genuinely concerned about putting innocent people at risk? Or did their protocols cost lives? And what exactly could drive someone to commit this sort of horrific crime? Laura Nash investigates.
Thanks, Christy. Now we're just playing news show. You know
I know.
mean?
Look, we've been doing this since we were kids.
Oh, yeah. Come about it honestly.
Yeah.
But yeah, so just for some background. So the last episode I researched on the show was the Marsha Clark episode. And in that, there was a Bob's Big Boy case where there was a murder that took place in that restaurant. So for our Patreon content, patreon.com/true crime and cocktails, because we always bring a little more, a little bit of extra true crime to each of our bonus episodes on there. I decided to research other murders that happened in restaurants that weren't connected to robberies. That was my content for one of our episodes over on Patreon. And then I found this, and not only because we talk about McDonald's far too much on this show and on Patreon, but also because it is a truly wild story. I immediately texted Christy and I was like, this is my next episode. I've got to do a full episode on it. And look at these pages. There's so many pages of notes. We got to get into it because it's going to be long. So
that's how they like it.
Yeah, well, listen, that's what she said. A real slapper, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Now listen.
His wang. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. Before we get going, obviously, I am going to give a quick, a brief warning, a trigger warning. There will be mentions of suicide and also graphic descriptions of shooting deaths, including the deaths of children. So I want to give a trigger warning about those for anyone who needs it. So San Ysidro is the southernmost suburb of San Diego. Located in Southern California, the border town is the busiest border crossing in both the U.S. and the Western Hemisphere. It is as well the fourth busiest land crossing in the world. In 2018, in 2018, San Ysidro recorded 9.4 million pedestrians crossing the border into the U.S., plus 14.5 million personal vehicles carrying 25.2 million passengers. In March 2019, a total of 1.2 million personal vehicles crossed the border. So that was an increase there. And in March of that same year, 930,000 pedestrians crossed into the United States through the San Ysidro port of entry. In 2019, the community of San Ysidro was a population of 22,682, and it was 90.5 Hispanic or Latinx, 3.1% Asian, and 2.4% white. There was additional demographics, but those were the top three, which I am only giving to kind of, it comes into play later in the story and to give an idea of the racial demographics of the area.
Sure.
In the 2016 documentary about the massacre called 77 Minutes, director Charlie Min stated that this community has been described as misunderstood and underserved. Police officer Miguel Rosario said that the area was known for heroin because of its proximity to the border. But I will also just say that there were so many people interviewed in that documentary, and it was really kind of lovely to see the pride that they took in their community and how much they loved it. So I don't want to paint it as though that's all that this community was about, because that I think is unfair. That said, because it is the busiest border crossing into the world, there were drugs coming in through that border. And because of that, San Diego actually annexed this area specifically because it was right at the border, so that the police could have separate jurisdiction to cover this area itself due to any border issues and crime that may exist. So shortly before 4 p.m. on July 18th, 1984, as I've stated in the synopsis, 41-year-old James Oliver Huberty left his apartment, which was about 200 feet or a half a block away from a McDonald's restaurant that was located at 460 West San Ysidro Boulevard. One of the employees working there that day was Wendy Flanagan, and she said it was a really busy McDonald's in general, and that there was always a lot of kids that would come to use their outdoor playground. They had a really fun one. The kids wouldn't even get any food. They would just come and play and hang out, and that was kind of just the thing that happened in that neighborhood. It was accepted.
Sure. Plus, can you imagine the smell of McDonald's that would pump out?
Would have been nice. Would have been very
on
nice.
A playground, like a little mini merry-go-round or something, smelling McDonald's. I'd do it now.
Oh, well, we got a date, baby.
Yeah.
So Huberty put a blanket with a gun had a gun with a blanket wrapped around it and took it into his battered black Mercury Marquise sedan. He drove down the hill and into the McDonald's parking lot, where he pulled up to the west door. He took the gun out of the blanket, locked his car, and walked into the restaurant. In a soft holster on his belt, he had a 9mm pistol with a 14-round clip. His favorite gun, his Uzi, was slung over his left shoulder. Its clip held 25 rounds. And in one hand, he held a 12-gauge pump-action shotgun that held 5 shells. And in the other hand, he carried a cloth bag filled with ammunition.
Jesus.
McDonald's assistant manager Kenny Villegas was seated across the restaurant diagonally from the door. He spotted the heavily armed Huberty when he entered. Kenny assumed that this was a robbery that was about to take place, so he really took a chance to get a good look at him, so that if he had to describe him or identify him later, he would know what he was talking about. He noted that the man was balding, around 40, a little over 6 feet tall, and around 190 pounds. He said he was strongly but trimly built, so kind of like a solid body type.
Sure.
Sweeping near the entrance where Huberty entered was John Arnold. John Arnold looked up to see the muzzle of a shotgun pointed at his face. Arnold later recalled, quote, "He was pointing the gun right at me, and he pulled the trigger, but nothing happened. Then he brought the gun down and started messing with it. Arnold then assumed that it was a joke, so kind of calmly walked away," which God bless you, Joe Arnold, but that feels like, I mean, John Arnold. What a bold joke.
Yeah.
But then almost immediately, a shotgun blast hit the ceiling. Chunks of insulation rained down. So at that point, Neva Kane, who was the manager of the restaurant, jumped to her feet and goes towards Huberty.
Oh,
which again,
wow.
So brave. I can't even handle it. She turns towards him. He raises the Uzi, immediately shoots her in the face, and she dropped with a bullet hole in her left eye, dying within minutes. She was 22 years old and a newlywed who had just been married 6 weeks prior.
Come on.
Oh, buckle in, because we're going to go through the whole incident first, and then we're going to kind of unravel the police aspect, and then we're going to get into who he is. But this first part it's brutal. Just know that. Wendy Flanagan said that she heard that shot and then peeked and saw the body. She knew immediately it was Neva. And she said that's when everyone started screaming and running. And just like that, Huberty was just shooting. Every person who survived the massacre remembers this moment slightly differently, which I think is completely fair and makes sense. It was complete chaos. Sure. It was terrifying. But they all kind of had a similar general sense, which was that he was yelling something along the lines of, "Don't move or you'll die. Everybody get on the ground, lay down or I'll kill you. I'll kill you like I kill lots of them." And that's a theme that's going to come up again and again. So at this point, everybody in the restaurant obeyed. They rushed to hit the floor. People were scrambling under tables, behind counters, anywhere that offered cover. Kenny, the assistant manager, remembers Huberty yelling, "You dirty swine, Vietnam assholes. I've killed 1,000 and I'll kill 1,000 more." This is important to remember again for later. He started shooting methodically, sometimes using the shotgun, sometimes the Uzi. And while he did move around a little bit from time to time, he mostly held his position in the center of the restaurant. And from there, every so often, he would squat and just spray gunfire under the tables where people were hiding. Albert Leos was working at the McDonald's on the grill at the time. He almost didn't go to work that day, but he did. I will also say off the bat, he's now a police officer because of the experience that he had that day.
Wow.
Yeah. And, you know, again, his story is unbelievable, which we'll get into as we talk about this. He also saw Huberty start to shoot from where he was in the kitchen, and he hid in that kitchen with 3 women who had been working the counter and fellow grill man Alex Vasquez. Now, the exact timeline of exactly when each of these things happened is kind of hard to put together. Trust me, I've been in this knee deep for a week.
Of course.
Because it was complete chaos. And also because one of his weapons was a semi-automatic that he had rigged himself to shoot even faster, which is another thing we'll get into. Some of these stories could have been happening simultaneously. So I'm going to go through all of the stories of the people that in the best kind of order that I can, but just bear with me that I am fully aware that some of these may not be in the exact right order. This is just kind of how it came out as I was trying to tell the story that worked the best for me.
Sure.
Due to the nature of the event. So the first call went to the police at 4 p.m. The message that was given was that a baby girl had been shot. Miguel Rosario was immediately dispatched. Now, there are 2 McDonald's on San Ysidro Boulevard, one on the east side and one on the west. He was accidentally dispatched to the wrong McDonald's. He was on his way to the east side one. When he was about a block away from that restaurant, he was called again, and this was corrected. Now, he says that he thinks this only cost them about 2 to 4 minutes at most. I looked this up. I looked up the addresses. From what I can tell,
yes,
it's about a 5-minute drive between the 2 locations. So it's possible that if he was speeding, lights and sirens going, he could have gotten there within 2 to 4 minutes. But something that is going to come up again and again in this story is how it was rush hour. The police like to remind us again and again that it was rush hour at this time and difficult to get anywhere. So I simply offer that because we point out the facts on this show. Now, we do know that Rosario did call 911 himself at 4:10, which is interesting to me. So it sounds to me like he got the call at 4 o'clock. He got there at 4:10. So to suggest you know what I mean? Like, it feels to me like there was a few more minutes there unaccounted for. Is it close to what he's estimating? possibly. I don't know how much time he had spent. Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
right.
The timeline is kind of hard, but I'll give him that it sounds like, okay, that's close. Now, my question is why this police officer chose to call 911 and not radio police dispatch. I don't have an answer for that, but, and this is where the true crime and cocktails magic comes into play.
Sure.
There is a bigger inconsistency that I found with Miguel Rosario's story that I am blown away by.
Sure.
He says that so across from the McDonald's, sharing the same parking lot, was a post office. He says he parked at the post office. He was told that the baby girl had been taken into the post office, but he also says that he never met or saw this alleged child. More on her in a minute. Rosario looked over to the McDonald's and says he saw Huberty coming out of the side door of the restaurant by the drive-thru. That's when he noticed him and said he noted that Huberty had a long-barreled Uzi. Huberty at this moment spotted Rosario and started to shoot at him. So Rosario admits he would have been justified in this moment shooting back. Because as we know, that is, in terms of the police, you get shot at, you are in your right.
Of course.
In his interview in the 77 Minutes documentary, he says he was, quote, outgunned, that he only had a .38 caliber handgun. He said the best he could do was take cover, so he went behind a truck as Huberty shot all through the truck and around the truck, and he tried best to cover himself up as he could do. However, in a book called Mass Murderers that was published in 1993, it states that when Rosario arrived, he scrambled around to the trunk of his car to get his bulletproof vest and his rifle. It goes on to talk in great detail about his military M16 rifle that was using high-velocity 223 caliber ammunition. It also states that this ammunition was so powerful, it would have been enough to penetrate the walls of the restaurant. And that maybe the reason he didn't want to use that gun was because it could possibly hit someone other than Huberty. Rosario is quoted in this book saying, and I quote, "I was in an excellent position to take him down if he had exited, but I had made up my mind not to shoot him inside. I will remind you, in the documentary, he stated that Huberty exited the restaurant." In the 77 Minutes documentary, he also states, quote, "I was pissed off that I was armed with a .38 and this guy was armed with an Uzi." But again, in the book, it speaks in great detail about how he had a military rifle with extremely powerful ammunition. So there's two inconsistencies there. And I know what you're thinking. Is this that important, Lauren? I think it is, because so much of this is going to come into play later when we break down the fact that this whole thing went on for 77 minutes and that so many people died.
Right.
I mean, I also think it's interesting to hear his account of this in 2016 or whenever he was interviewed for the 2016 documentary.
Right.
And the 1993 interview, or the book was released in 1993. So that's closer to the time. I just think the details of whether he exited the restaurant and what gun are really important.
Yes.
And I don't have an answer. At the end of the day, I could not get corroboration either way. But again, we bring you everything on this show.
Of course.
So the baby girl in question, my belief is that this girl was a little girl named Carla Duarte. Maricela and her husband, Astolfo, I think he also went by the nickname Felix, were hungry that day. Astolfo wanted tacos, but she wanted McDonald's. So they parked by the post office and walked to the McDonald's with their daughter, baby Carla. But they didn't make it inside the restaurant. Maricela says the gunshot felt like a bomb had hit her face. She felt blood on her face and pain in her eye. Her husband took baby Carla and ran towards the post office as Maricela ran to the left. She was covered in blood as Huberty kept shooting. When she finally found her husband, he no longer had Carla. He had given her to someone. When Maricela saw that, she says she fainted. Carla, the baby, had been shot. So someone handed her to a police officer named Steve Pernicano, who worked for the San Diego Police Department. A woman ran up to his car and said, "This baby's been shot." And so he took that woman, who didn't speak English, in his car. She was holding the baby's head wound with her hand, applying pressure. She kept saying, "This isn't my baby. It's not my baby," in Spanish. And Officer Pernicano literally held the wound on that baby's back with one of his hands and drove to the hospital with one other hand.
Oh my God.
Maricela Duarte was separated from baby Carla for 2 weeks because she was a baby. She's not going to have identification on her.
Of course.
And she, the husband, and the wife all got sent to separate hospitals.
Oh my God.
So she didn't know if her baby was alive or dead.
Right.
When they finally got Carla back, the doctor said they had to cut out several parts of her intestines and take out 30 pieces of shard, and that it was an absolute miracle the baby had survived. However, she was one of the very first to arrive at the hospital, and the doctor believed the only reason she had a chance was because they weren't overwhelmed yet. And we will remember this went on for 77 minutes. So they had time to attend to her and not be swamped with all of these gunshot victims,
course.
Right?
Yes.
So I don't know for a fact that it was Carla that was mentioned in that first 911 call, but it makes sense to me that it would be here since we know she was the very first victim in the hospital. It just feels like that makes sense. Maricela, the mother, did lose her eye in this attack. She now has a fake eye as well as a massive scar on her stomach. She says the pain in her face is so intense, even over 20 years later. She also can't sleep. 4 hours would be her best, even if she's taking sleeping pills. Still, she says she doesn't hate Huberty. She said if her daughter had died, maybe then she would have hated him. Carla is an adult now. She doesn't know exactly how many times she was shot, but she does have scars in her back, her stomach, and her head. She says she's very thankful to be alive and is very thankful to the woman, the stranger who got her to that police officer, and of course to that police officer, Steve Pernicaro himself. Between the two of them, it's safe to say they did save her life. Sadly, Maricela's husband and Carla's father was murdered in Sonora, Mexico, 6 years after the massacre took place in 1990, unrelated. So, from this account, we know that early on in the attack, Huberty was already shooting both inside and outside of the restaurant at people in the parking lot. He probably didn't realize what a good idea it was for him to smash the windows of the restaurant early on. The shards of glass made it hard later for the police to see in because the glass pieces would shimmer in the light. Also, it was tinted laminated glass. It was very thick. So the glass didn't exactly shatter. It kind of splintered and spidered. So it was really obstructing the view. Joshua Coleman recounts that he and 2 friends, Omar Hernandez and David Flores, went to Yum Yum Donuts that day and then decided to push their bikes across the parking lot to get McDonald's sundaes. Someone in the parking lot started to yell at them at that time. He realizes now they were trying to warn them, and that's when Joshua got shot in the right side. Omar got shot in the back, and David never even had time to turn to run as he immediately got shot in the chest, and they all fell to the ground. They were all 11 years old at the time.
Oh my God.
Joshua says blood was spurting out of him. Huberty kept shooting. He shot out car windows next to them. Joshua says his lungs started to collapse. He felt like he was suffocating, and he played dead in the parking lot for over an hour. David Flores died instantly. Joshua says that Omar took a few minutes to die. He said Omar Hernandez was crying for his mom, wailing, then vomited, and then died. This was his best friend that he watched. Omar's brother Fernando says Omar brought great happiness to their family. He was a happy and mischievous child. He also said that Joshua taught him English. When they first met, Omar didn't speak any English, but they became friends because they didn't know how to communicate. And he taught him English. And that might be one of the most gutting things I think I've ever had to say on this show.
Yeah.
Aida and Miguel Victoria were an elderly couple, aged 69 and 74, respectively. They approached the restaurant. Joshua says he also saw Huberty shoot Aida and then Miguel. Miguel Rosario, remember the first responder on the place. He says he was prone behind a big palm tree at this point. He says he saw Huberty through the window. He had him in his sights, but the shot was not taken because he says he didn't know if there was more than one shooter or if it was a hostage situation. Oh, how times have changed since 1984.
Yeah.
When I think about some of the cases that we hear nowadays of police going the other way to a fault.
Yes.
It's interesting, you know? He said it might not have worked to take that shot. He says it didn't make sense. that the shooter would have been working alone. And if he shot him, then the other shooters inside could have started executing people. But keep in mind, we know there were no other shooters in the restaurant. And we also know that at this point, the parking lot is littered with multiple bodies, including numerous children.
Yeah.
Again, just building the scene for you.
Of course.
Doug Curley, a TV journalist, got to the scene and he said he didn't even think people knew what they were seeing because there was literally dead children everywhere. It's not something you typically see on a suburban street. He said the first thing he saw was Omar dead on his bike. When he recounts this in the documentary, he bursts into tears. It's clearly something that's never left him.
Right.
I should also note KFMB reporter Carlos Amezcua was technically the first TV journalist on the scene. He was capturing everything kind of mentally at the time. He said that he heard whistles of gunshots going by his head, and he hit the ground so fast he actually got a bloody nose because he hit his nose on the pavement, but he did not get hit with a bullet. Back inside the restaurant, Keith Thomas, who was 12 years old at the time, was in the back of the restaurant by the play area with his best friend, Mateo Herrera, and Mateo's father, Ronald Herrera. Keith was shot in both arms, but he says he didn't really feel it. He said he just felt the heat of it. It's amazing what adrenaline will do to people. Keith says he remembers Huberty's legs and boots as he was hiding under a table at the time. Keith was shielded by Ronald Herrera, who again was his best friend Mateo's father. Ronald kept asking Keith not to move. Ronald took 7 shots, and that is what saved Keith's life. He gave his life for Keith.
Wow.
After everything was over, later, Keith went to check in on Mateo, but sadly he had not made it, and Keith went into complete shock. He says the incident changed him completely. He was a different child afterwards. He became very aggressive, didn't want to hang out with friends anymore. It just basically ruined his entire life.
Right.
Ronald Herrera saved Keith that day, but sadly he lost his wife, Blythe, who was trying to save Mateo. Sadly, she was trying to shield him, but both of them did get shot and killed. There's actually video footage of Ronald being taken into surgery in the documentary, and I was like, this shouldn't exist. That man bravely gave his life for his child's best friend, and it is not our business.
No.
In my opinion. It shouldn't exist.
God, no.
I will also say, because this went on for so long, so much of it is documented. There is so much video and so many photographs. And I want to give a real massive trigger warning to anybody who might be interested in watching that documentary. There is so much footage that I have now seen that I will never unsee. It starts around the 38-minute mark, FYI, and it is everything. They show everything. So just know it's not an easy watch.
Right.
Keith said that Mateo loved Star Wars and music and was an amazing visual artist. He was great at drawing and that he was his best friend. Maria Leticia Rivera was a mother of a 1- and 4-year-old. They were both daughters. This one is difficult to listen to.
Boy. Kate.
Her daughters were crying and she kept telling them to go to sleep so they wouldn't feel the pain. I mean, this is what mothers do in the moments when they think their children are going to die, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
I will say, I'll just give everybody relief right now. The children did not die. So I will give you this relief right now.
Okay.
But the journey that she goes through in this moment is just heartbreaking. She didn't want the children to know what exactly was happening because they were so young. So she told them that the bullets were ice because there was so much blood everywhere. She also didn't know if they had been shot. So she said, an ice machine exploded. You've been hit with ice. That's it. So she said, just go to sleep.
Quick thinking.
I know. She said, just go to sleep and everything's going to be fine. She massaged their heads, told them to go to sleep. Huberty came to the table. All of them played dead. He violently kicked her. She kept it up. She literally played dead so well, he bought it. There was also so much blood that he bought it.
Sure.
A bullet had grazed her arm and her 4-year-old had been shot in the leg, but the 3 of them did survive.
Oh, thank God.
Maria's husband, Victor Rivera, who was 25 at the time, squared off with Huberty and begged him to stop. He turned his Uzi on him, screaming, "Shut up," and fired again and again and again. The coroner would later say he found 14 bullet wounds on Victor's body.
Oh my God.
Huberty had been telling everyone to be quiet and had been asking to quiet the children because he was getting anxiety. He said he didn't want to kill the children, but the children, of course, did not stop crying. And so he started just going table to table, shooting everybody. Children did not matter. Jackie Reyes was shielding her 8-month baby Carlos. This is bad. And her 11-year-old niece, Aurora Pena. She was shot and killed. Jackie was shot and killed. Of course, the baby started to cry. Huberty started to scream at the baby, and then just point blank shot and killed the baby. I mean, this, there's so much, again, because so many people, there was 19 people he wounded that survived. So there were so many people in there that witnessed all of this.
Right.
And the reason why I'm getting brutal, I'm getting brutal with the details for a multitude of reasons, which I'll get into in a little bit. So just go with me on this. At one point, Aurora, who was again the niece that Jackie had been shielding, and Aurora did survive because her aunt shielded her. She did survive. She was 11 years old. She heard a lull in the gunshots. So she just very slowly opened her eyes a little bit, and 6 feet away, he was standing there staring straight at her and just started to shoot her. Somehow, miraculously, even though he shot her point blank, she did still survive. Wow. But can you imagine how that's going to haunt you for the rest of your life?
Yeah.
I don't know how that person ever slept again.
No.
It's horrifying.
Oh.
The other thing that's horrifying is, in the moment that she opened her eyes and saw him, he, for some reason, threw a bag of French fries at her and then started shooting. He also poured himself several soft drinks from several different of the soda machines. He would chug them down and then throw the cup at bodies. He would also just get food from the back and then walk around throwing it at people, whether they were alive or dead. The MO with this guy is really all over the place. So Albert Leos, who, as we know, was hiding out in the kitchen at this point, he says there's no way anyone could have grabbed him. Of course not, by the way. This guy was armed with 3 guns and was completely, he was a madman. I don't think, no. I want to go on, I just want to make it very clear, no one in that restaurant did anything wrong. And I think the implication of even asking that question is a little questionable to me, because it's it's nobody's job in there to take this guy down, by the way. Nobody's job in there.
No.
He also pointed out, Albert also pointed out that, of course, the kitchen and other areas in that restaurant were lined, the walls were lined with stainless steel. So the bullets were also ricocheting everywhere. So it was literally a death trap. Even if you weren't getting hit directly, you could get hit by a stray bullet.
Right.
Huberty would reload his gun, wait a few minutes, and then just go up to bodies that were dead and shoot them again. So, for example, Ronald Herrera, who we know bravely died protecting Keith Thomas.
Right.
He was shot, and then he was shot again 45 minutes later. So I'm just, again, anybody who's listening to the show knows where I'm going with this. We're building a real case against the police is what we're doing. That's what we're doing.
Of course.
Anyway.
That is
I've
tipped
my hand. Yeah, of course. It is. So another assistant manager on the scene, Guillermo Flores, managed to get to a phone on the wall and pound the 0 button to get the operator as he slid to the floor. He whispered, telling the operator someone was shooting up the restaurant. She told him to call 911.
Are you fucking kidding me?
He said, if I stand up to dial 911 on that phone, I will be shot and killed. She said, you need to dial 911. He said,
I don't give a shit if it's protocol or not. Fuck that operator.
Oh, he basically had to plead with her to please connect him to the police. And eventually she agreed. But there's also, I don't know which of the phone calls that one was, because there was a few. But again, a big theme in this entire case is the time that gets lost. And when you start to add up a few minutes here and a few minutes there, just painting a picture.
Of course.
So Huberty was going through a lot of ammunition. As I said, he would reload every so often. And Every time he would kind of get distracted by reloading, the people who were still alive would try and gauge their chances. Could they escape? But mostly they were too far from a door, they were too close to him, too wounded, or too fearful of getting shot again. So many of them just chose to play dead and try and wait it out, which absolutely makes sense to me.
Yes.
Wendy Flanagan said she couldn't make out a lot of the things that Huberty was saying and yelling. But at the beginning of all of this, I know I'm jumping around. It's tough to build the whole story and timeline. At the beginning of this whole thing, another assistant manager, there was like a shift change, I think, happening, named Poco Lopez, was going over paperwork with Kenny, as we know from earlier, in a booth. That was when Huberty first came in. He had a radio on the booth that was playing softly at the time while the two of them worked on paperwork and numbers. At some point during the shooting later on, Huberty walked over, firing his gun as he came, and took that radio. He took it to the order counter, fiddled with the dial. Many people assumed that he was searching for a news station, trying to get a news report about what was happening. He went through 7 different stations and finally landed on one. But it wasn't the news. He wasn't looking for reports about himself. It was music. And then, as many of the victims witnessed, he started to do a little shuffle dance as he would walk around, continuing to shoot people that were both alive or dying or dead.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
Every once in a while, he would also let out an angry shout. Once he yelled, in reference to himself, that he did not deserve to live, but that he was taking care of the matter. Between those outbursts, he would simply act like he was doing a job. So very like mania to just resigned was his kind of thing. Wendy Flanagan says she kept wondering where the police were. He's shooting and killing more people and it's taking so long. She said she could hear sirens, but no one was coming in. He just kept going. Albert Leos said he counted 125 bullets or shots and then lost count. For the record, it ended up being over 251.
Oh my God.
At one point, Huberty impulsively vaulted himself over the counter to check the kitchen, and that's when he found the assistant manager, Guillermo Flores, on the phone to the police. And of course, with him was Albert Leos, Alex Vasquez, and the 3 young women who were working the counter, as I mentioned before. They were trying to stay as quiet as possible. They said that they think this was about 40 minutes in, but again, it's so hard to know exactly. But the 3 women were kind of silently crying. He comes over the counter. He sees them. Vasquez says that Huberty was quite surprised, but calm, saying, quote, "Oh, there's more." And then in a flash of rage, "You're trying to hide from me, you bastards." Then he raised the Uzi. One of the women screamed in Spanish, "Don't kill me," and he opened fire. One of those employees was Margarita or Maggie Padilla, and she encouraged Wendy Flanagan to run to the rear exit. She grabbed Wendy's arm and said, "Run." Wendy shook away from her and kept running, but unfortunately Maggie did not as she was hit. Wendy went to go out the emergency exit, but it was locked. She says that the restaurant was afraid that they were going to steal food, so they kept the emergency door locked at all times. And I just want to say, I've never thought I'd say I actively wanted someone to sue a McDonald's, but I think that is disgusting on a multitude of levels. It's an emergency exit, and you literally could have cost people their lives. As, I'm alleging. Anyways, so when she couldn't get out that door, she went downstairs to a closet. She said 6 people and a baby ended up hiding in that closet. At the same time, Albert was shot 5 times, and the only reason Huberty stopped was because he ran out of ammunition. So he went to the front of the restaurant to reload. Albert tried to run, but immediately fell as he realized he had been shot badly in his leg. So he crawled down 25 stairs to get to that closet to hide. He says it was his sheer will to live that helped him move. He said, "You just want to live and survive." And he knew that if he didn't move, Huberty would come back and kill him. So he moved as fast as he could. He slid against the closet door and said, "Please let me in." The others inside dragged him into the closet. He collapsed because he was in so much pain, but remained completely silent. He knew that if he let out any sounds, he would jeopardize everyone's safety. So he bit down on a cloth so that Huberty wouldn't hear him. He says he also took off his shoelaces and tied one around his leg like a tourniquet. and one around his left arm. At this point, the documentarian Charlie asked him, "Were you wondering where in the world is the police?" To which he replied, "Yes, I was." Believe me,
he's not the only one.
I think we all were. So, at some point in all of this, Huberty's wife, Etna, and their oldest daughter, Zelia, drove by the McDonald's in their van. The youngest daughter, they had 2 daughters together, which I'll get into later.
Yeah.
The youngest daughter, Cassandra, who was nicknamed Bobby, I don't know, was off babysitting at that time. Now, Etna and Zelia had gone grocery shopping, but Etna later told police that Zelia had become ill with a vision of a lot of police and ambulances around a McDonald's. And of course, they had this McDonald's at the end of very close to their apartment.
Right.
So as they drove by, Etna recognized Huberty's car in the driveway, and then I guess drove to her friend's house. That was a little confusing, that detail that I could find. It was at that friend's house on TV. She heard that the shooter was in camo pants and a maroon shirt, which she, of course, had seen her husband wearing when he left the apartment earlier. At that point, she knew she needed to call the police. On the phone, the police operator was talking to her. Etna said she didn't know exactly which weapons Huberty had with him, so she just listed all the guns that he owned to the best of her memory. But she did say that she knew he had 1,000 rounds of armor-piercing ammunition and was certain that he probably took them with him. She also told them that he was ambidextrous and could easily shoot very well with both hands. So, back to Miguel Rosario for just a second. The documentarian of the film I'm talking about, Charlie Min, asked Miguel, "So it wasn't until after you went in there that you found out people had been murdered?" And he responded, quote, "You bet. Nobody knew that this guy was just by himself and just arbitrarily shooting people." Here's what I'd like to say. Miguel, you were the first police officer there. You saw dead children and dead elderly people outside the restaurant on the ground.
Yeah.
What did you think he was doing in there? If he was literally sharpshooting, whatever you want to call it, picking off people outside, children, the elderly, what did you think he was doing in there? That's where he started. There was no police presence because there's an argument that some people want to make that he was shooting out. They thought, oh, well, we just thought he was shooting at the police. There was one police officer present at that point. Charlie Min continues, quote, "At no time during the 77 minutes did law enforcement know that people were being murdered?" Miguel Rosario responds, "That's to my knowledge." And that feels impossible to me because you saw the people dead outside. So even if you didn't know exactly what was going on in there, witnesses outside, not the police, other witnesses have said they could clearly see Huberty loading and unloading his guns inside the restaurant from outside. A man named Jerry Sanders was the SWAT commander at that time. So then they asked Jerry, "Did you know there was a man in there shooting babies and innocent people?" And Jerry Sanders said, this is a quote, "No, we knew that people were being shot. We knew that people had been shot. There was some on the perimeter. There was also some alive on the perimeter crouched down, which meant the officers couldn't rush it and couldn't fire back in there." So it sounds to me like you did know he was killing people in there. When the question was, did you know he was in there shooting people? And you said, no, we knew that people were being shot. We knew that people had been shot. What?
Yeah. Like, are they just trying to cover for the fact of what a shitty job they did?
Well,
and listening. Look, I get it. There's a madman with guns.
Yeah.
I would be scared. Yeah, I get it.
Yes.
Even as a police officer, I'm going to be scared.
Yes.
But you're a police officer.
And here's the thing, and I'm going to get into this more later. There's many people at different levels in the police department involved. And I think the bottom line for me is just accountability. That's it. I'm not saying that anybody has to be perfect. This is unprecedented, all of the above.
Yeah.
But you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But again, I'll get into that more in a bit. So, the journalist who was on the scene, as we know, Carlos Amascua, says he saw several people get shot inside the restaurant from his vantage point outside. He said, yes, it was tough to see through the glass, but he knew what was going on in there. So arguably the police should be able to see the same thing. Jerry Sanders, again, the SWAT commander, repeatedly said the sun didn't allow you to see in there. But if that was true, how? Because we also know, again, spoiler alert, like that we know the Titanic sinks. We know that Huberty eventually gets taken down by a sniper. So if that was possible, how are both things possible is my question. Yeah. But again, we'll get there. The sniper in question, Chuck Foster, said that he thought this was a robbery gone bad. And for some reason, the shooter was shooting at cops and firemen, but he didn't think he was killing off everyone inside that he could. Charlie Min, the documentarian, asked Jerry Sanders, so what's the greater risk here? Intervening and killing innocent people, or having a madman continue to fire away? Jerry replies, quote, I simply don't know how you'd do it differently. 3 different weapons, so you think there's 3 different shooters. You have to have a plan so you don't get more people killed. Chuck Foster, the sniper, says that at the beginning of all of this, they had gotten at least 3 different suspect descriptions of possible shooters inside. Just shooting one of them, these alleged 3, may anger the additional 2, and then encourage them to shoot hostages. So when they got the information that it was just one suspect, they were given the green light. Now, what is the green light? And why was it only then that they were given the green light? Well, I'll tell you. Right after the break.
Well, people, you heard the lady. Grab a drink, get some fries, maybe some chips. You know what? I'm going to say chips, but I want our dear UK listeners to know I mean fries.
Of course.
I'm just saying it, that way for something different. And we will be right back with more on the McDonald's massacre on this episode of True Crime and Cocktails.
All right. Clap 2, electric boogaloo. 1, 2, 3.
Welcome back to True Crime and Cocktails. Before the break, Lauren was horrifying us all with details of this massacre, while also enraging us with conflicting stories from the police. So, back to you, Lauren.
Thanks, Christy. Well, listen, we're gonna keep going, and it's going to continue to be enraging and upsetting. So, Chuck Foster, as I've mentioned before, who was the SWAT sniper, arrived at 4:40 p.m. to the post office, and he was on the roof of the post office by 5:02 p.m. that day. He said he could see a few bodies in the restaurant. I want to remind you, he also has said, though, I didn't think he was killing anybody in there. So, another confliction there. He said he could see when Huberty was firing out of the building and that he had a lot of advantages to shoot out of the building. He's speaking of Huberty here, that it was kind of open range. There was nothing for the police to hide themselves behind or protect themselves with as they approached to try to give aid to the people dying on the ground outside. He said that Huberty would just shoot them off, which, while of course true, it does mean that those children, the elderly couple, etc., just laid on the ground dying with no one trying to give them any aid. And there was periods of time he did need to reload his guns, that he was walking around inside the restaurant. So it does fall apart for me a little bit, that there wasn't, I'll say it, that there wasn't a little bit more being done. I said
sure.
It. My opinion, not stating that that's a fact. I'm saying that's my opinion. So Foster said that Huberty's gunshots shot open a door. Huberty was sitting on the counter as he was reloading his gun. Then he hopped off and walked towards that open door. The top of the door frame was covering his face and neck, but that Foster had a clear view of his chest, so he shot him in the heart. The high-velocity bullet went into his chest, severing his aorta, ripping out a piece of his spine, and mushrooming out of his back, leaving an exit hole an inch wide. I wanted to get graphic with his death, and not just about the people that he killed.
Sure.
Because I think that that's only fair.
Yes.
At 5:20 p.m., Officer W.T. Michalek moved in and handcuffed the dead Huberty's wrists, which was protocol at the time. Even though they knew he was dead, they didn't take the chance. And now, this is a detail that I find so haunting. The San Diego Police Department's SWAT uniform was camo pants and tops. So keep in mind that Huberty throughout this was wearing camo pants. He was wearing a maroon top, but when survivors were opening their eyes, they were seeing men flooding in dressed very similarly to their shooter. And so many of them assumed that these were additional terrorists of some kind and that they were coming to finish his job. So they just continued to play dead, even when the SWAT team came in, which again is just gutting. Wendy Flanagan says that someone came to the closet that they were hiding in and was yelling for them to open it, but they couldn't hear them or exactly what they were saying. So they didn't come out of the closet. And the police eventually forced open the door and drew their guns on them because they didn't know if there was another shooter hiding somewhere in there, but just an additional trauma for those people once again. Detective Rick Carlson said when he got to the scene, the sniper shot had already been taken and that police were trying to secure the scene, but that it was becoming complete chaos as people were coming out of the restaurant. Those people didn't want to come directly to the police because they had just been inside for 77 minutes going through this abject terror, and they wanted to find their loved ones. So they also didn't know at this point if there was another suspect involved. And he was saying, as people were coming out, it's like, are these all victims? Is one of them another suspect? We don't know. Guadalupe Del Rio was one of the first victims out of the restaurant. She didn't even know that she had been shot. And if you see photographs of her, I'll post one to our socials. She was covered in blood. She had been shot in the leg and was completely doused. But again, as I said before, adrenaline is a crazy thing. She had no idea that that had happened. In total, 15 people got out after Huberty was taken down. They believe that there was about 50 people in the restaurant when he first entered at 4 p.m. At this point, 20 of the people that Huberty killed were already dead. So, and I'm getting back. I know that we ended on me talking about green lights, and don't worry, I will get back to that. I'm just, I'm taking us on a journey, leading us into it. Journalist Doug Curley said, there were mistakes made, but not deliberately made. He also said, and this is a quote, Jerry Sanders, I think, would admit that it was a mistake in hindsight to have called off the green light, which allowed the sniper to take a shot. But he was far away, and as the SWAT commander, he needed to know what he had. Jerry Sanders, again, the SWAT commander in question, said, I got on scene a little bit after 5 o'clock. So I think I got the notification around 4:34 or 4:35, jumped right on the freeway, but it was rush hour traffic. When asked, do you regret rescinding the green light? Did that lose time? Some people have said, shouldn't Jerry have had more trust in the people that were there that day? Jerry answered, the green light is simply a term of art, and I don't think people understood that. With a red light, it means you can't take a shot if the person isn't presenting any danger. We wanted to make sure we had an accurate description, that we knew how many suspects were inside before we told anyone to shoot. Chuck Foster said that he knew all along he could have shot any time that he saw him, and he would have. So, for context, Chuck Foster goes on to say, quote, not having the green light doesn't mean I can't fire. It just means the suspect would need to be showing an immediate threat to another officer or himself or another person. But after that incident, we stopped using those code words and just went back to plain language. I wonder why. Because the whole problem here, and I'll get into it a little bit more in a bit, but the whole problem here was that there was this debate about whether or not Chuck Foster had a green light or a red light. And again, but I would also state, like, with the red light, when we see all the dead bodies outside, I feel like that's showing that he is presenting danger. Wouldn't you?
Yeah, I would think so.
So again, there is this debate again, because we're talking about 77 minutes and the police response, etc., which is what we do on this show. We state the facts. It does feel interesting that so much time passed and that he didn't just have the go ahead to, if you have the shot, take the shot. Because the story that keeps coming back again and again is we didn't know if there were more shooters in there. We didn't want to put anyone else at risk. But what we know is that inside that restaurant, so many people were dead. Yeah, the vast majority was dead. So again, you know, there's so many moral debates that I'll get into by the end of this episode, but about where is the line? Where do we want police to intervene? Where do we want police to not to go over and above? You know what I'm saying? Like,
sure.
But again, I digress. Commander Larry Gore claimed that most of the killings happened within the first 10 minutes of the incident. Miguel Rosario said this as well. Filmmaker Charlie Mins said people that he spoke to would refute that claim. But Rosario said, I said the majority of them. Not all of them. Albert Leos, who was in the restaurant, I will remind you, said, no, that never happened. Wendy Flanagan, who again was inside the restaurant, says Albert didn't get shot until halfway into all of it. And some of the people who got shot halfway through died. That wasn't in the first 10 minutes. I want to remind you, Ronald Herrera was shot 45 minutes apart.
Right.
According to the coroner's office, 13 of the victims inside would have died almost immediately when shot. But I'm going to tell you why I think that's BS. And this is my own opinion. I'm alleging. I'm not scientifically enabled, but here we are. So Paul Ibarrando believes that the claims that the majority of people were killed in the first 10 minutes came from witness statements and what people told them. He was a homicide lieutenant on the case, and he said that the initial firing by Huberty, when he was walking around shooting people and then walking around shooting them again, he was just focusing on police officers after that it had nothing to do with the people in there. We know that that's not true, but going by what the people inside have said. Now, there was a moment in the documentary where Charlie Min did say, well, maybe they bled to death because it took an hour and 17 minutes, which I did think was an amazing moment.
Sure.
Wendy Flanagan said that Huberty did shoot a lot at the beginning, but the majority weren't killed in the first 10 minutes. Many were shot, but not dead. There's a possibility that if EMTs could have got in there, people could have been saved. They were laying, and then Huberty would get bored and reshoot people. Adriana Wright, Jackie Reyes's sister, Jackie Reyes, of course, died protecting her niece Aurora, also trying to protect her 8-month-old son Carlos. She said that when it came time for Jackie's funeral, they couldn't dress her in the dress they wanted to for her to be buried in because her body was so destroyed.
Oh.
She had no neck. She had been shot 48 times.
Oh my God.
With the Uzi. So we know that he was shooting people at multiple different times. And we also know from Aurora's witness statement that she opened her eyes at that other point and he was right there and he was shooting at them again. And she was still kind of in a pile with her Aunt Jackie at that point. It is more than possible, in my opinion, and this is solely my opinion, it is more than possible that Jackie could have still been alive after that first round of shooting. Her neck and upper body were completely destroyed by the end. So can we say for sure exactly when her heart stopped? I know that I'm not a coroner or a medical examiner, but I think it is careless to suggest that every person in there didn't bleed out over the course of an hour and 17 minutes, or that the second round of shooting that was decimating these bodies couldn't have been what actually killed them. Also, I want to add, Jackie, who was shot 48 times, was pregnant at the time.
Jesus.
But she was dead in the first 10 minutes, so it didn't really matter if the police acted or not, right? Because that's the story that keeps getting told when you talk to the fucking people. I just like randomly swore, I didn't even feel it coming. But I'm so angry about it because the attitude that they take is that it's like, well, they were dead in the first 10 minutes anyway. And it's like, that's enough for you? That's enough for you. Well, they were dead in the first 10 minutes, so it doesn't matter anyway? I can't with that. I think that is deplorable. Miguel Rosario was asked, quote, in retrospect, would you have taken that shot when he was the first person on the scene?
Right.
And he says, quote, I've thought about that, and I've come to the conclusion that without the information I have now, in the moment, I made the right call. I'm very comfortable with that. No guilt, because you can't. I mean, you could. If you want to beat yourself up over it, you can. I think that's one of the reasons I've been able to move on with my life without being traumatized. I didn't allow myself to go there, and I'm good. Aurora's best friend, Imelda Perez, who was also around the age of 11, tried to save her little sister, Claudia Perez. Claudia's head exploded in Imelda's arms. Claudia was 9 at the time.
Jesus.
But I'm really glad, Miguel Rosario, that you are able to move through your life completely unaffected by this. And I don't even know if I believe that statement for him. It sounds to me like maybe that's trying to prove that he's been unaffected.
Sure.
But I will say, and this is just from my own heart.
Yeah.
Don't say that on camera.
No.
It's so disrespectful. It's so disrespectful. I don't give a shit if you're saying, yes, I had the chance to take a shot and I could have taken it, but I decided not to in the moment. And there's a lot of conflicting stories he's telling about his situation, about the type of gun, etc. And then you're almost bragging about the fact that this hasn't affected your life in any way. And there's another person, literally, Imelda, who held her sister and watched her die in the most violent, unnecessary, gory, life-altering way. It's just classless. Do you know what I mean? As a police officer, as anybody, but as a police officer, tasteless. My opinion. Yes. Albert Leos, who I will remind was a victim himself, who was shot 5 times, was asked, if you had all the victims in one room right now, what would you tell them? And he said, and I quote, I'm sorry I couldn't help them. He was a teenager at the time. He was a kid. And he then decided to devote his life to becoming a police officer because of that scenario.
That is beautiful.
It's beautiful. Yeah. And it also illustrates to me that Officer Rosario has managed to alleviate himself of any burden of guilt when a teenaged victim of the crime holds that guilt for him. I love that Rosario is boasting about not being traumatized with these 2 examples also being present. I understand that police officers have an extremely tough job. I get that they have to compartmentalize. I get it. But to say that this event absolutely did not change you, to say that you don't think there's anything you could have done differently or to help more, to say nothing apologetic, in my opinion, is shameful and not human. And I understand he could have got a bad edit in that documentary, so I'm going to put that out there too. But what I will say is, given what the edit was, that was my personal takeaway. Yeah. I will also say, seeing the footage of reporters shoving microphones in people's faces as they were escaping the restaurant is vile and unexcusable. Yes. Journalist Doug Curley said he was allowed to see the videotape police made of inside the McDonald's. This was a police video crew that went into the scene and shot everything before any of the bodies were touched or taken out.
Of course, yes.
And he said he wished he hadn't seen that tape. Well, what I will say is I also wish that I hadn't seen that tape, but it is absolutely in the documentary 77 minutes. Or again, it begins around the 38-minute mark. It shows absolutely everything, and it is something I will never unsee. When I close my eyes, sometimes I see it. Again, a very thorough documentary, but just know if you are not comfortable seeing dead children and infants, don't or skip over.
Yeah.
It's not left me since. Detective Rick Carlson said it was a very long process to identify the bodies. A newspaper headline ran at that time stating, quote, hundreds suffer through the night, not knowing of relatives' fate. On the second day, the homicide squad took Polaroids of all the victims and set up an auditorium near the McDonald's. Detective Carlson said it was the most difficult thing he's ever done in his career. Because again, remember, certainly at that time, and I don't have children, but I'm assuming children now don't carry ID.
Yeah.
So they would literally hold up Polaroids of these dead children and wait for someone in the crowd to have a horrific reaction, recognizing their loved one. And he said they would cry. Everybody, the police, the people in the crowd. He cries in the documentary retelling this. And I can't imagine what that must have been. And for that, I have great compassion. But I want to remind you, good news. Miguel Rosario feels great about his life and his choices, and absolutely nothing haunts him.
I just, like, that can't be real, right?
I have to believe. And listen, if there was anybody who's ever listening to this, I say this with love. Like, I want to wrap him in a blanket because I don't believe that that's true. I hope that that's not true.
It feels like something he tells himself.
Exactly. And again, I have compassion for that.
Sure.
But I do think it came off certainly a little more callous than was necessary given the nature of this whole situation.
Yes. And my God, I mean, to your point, yes, in their job, police have to compartmentalize and they can't take everything to heart. And I get that. But seeing dead children, just piles of dead children, that's gonna haunt you.
It should.
And to be like, I've been fine ever since.
Never traumatized me. Totally
fine. The whole night. Don't know what you're talking about. I actually forget it happens until people ask me about it. Like that's
what I'm skipping ahead. You just hit the nail on the head. The sniper, Chuck Foster, he said, I hadn't thought about it for years. And then my daughter brought up something about it to me. And I thought about it then, but I didn't think about it for years after that too.
I just like regular call. Sure. So a case where like a single person is murdered. Maybe you see enough of that in your career that you don't think about them all. But a massive amount of people die. And that's just another day at the office, just like every other. I don't buy it.
And even if there's a world in which that's true,
yeah,
don't say it publicly. It's disrespectful to the victims and the families of the victims, in my opinion. Al Vitella was the second responding officer on the scene that day. He was once quoted as saying that he feels they did not serve or protect that day. So in the documentary, the filmmaker Charlie asked if he still believed that. And he said, quote, "In some respects, I do. It wasn't because we didn't do our job. It was because we didn't have the tools, intelligence, training. The things police do now are totally different than what we did back then." And I think that that is fair.
Sure.
If they did not have, again, the metaphorical tools and the literal tools, that is a fair assessment. But again, that takes accountability. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It still says, yeah, we failed. And I wish we had more resources.
Yes.
I'm okay with that. But saying we were completely blameless when there was nothing, whatever, that's where it falls apart for me.
Yes.
According to The Economist, SWAT deployments across America have increased 17-fold since 1980, from 3,000 times a year to 50,000 times a year.
Wow.
Detective Carlson says they no longer use the surround and contain method. They know that they need to get in there and take action with an active shooter now. Albert Leos says, obviously the model has changed. I will add, other than Uvalde.
Uvalde? Yeah.
So that's, again, different
situation.
Or those
fuckers all stood around in that hallway laughing about shit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I can't
either.
That.
I can't either. Jerry Sanders says that they expanded training and went to a full-time SWAT team after this incident, that they now have a flight of helicopters and different radios, that training picked up dramatically. When asked why do shootings still happen today, he blames mental illness. He was asked, if you had to do it all over again, would you do anything differently? And Jerry Sanders said, quote, "You have the worst case scenario you could come up against in San Diego. You've got it right at the border in rush hour with lights in the windows so you can't see through when you have a madman shooting 251 rounds out of there. Police officers the whole time. The windows had all been spidered. You couldn't see him because of the sun. I don't know what you could do differently." The filmmaker then asked, according to the Union Tribune, your beeper wasn't working at the time, and you got word 30 minutes after it had started. Is that true? And Jerry responded, it was. I was the top brass of the police department, and I was having a workshop in Mission Bay, and I was facilitating that. My beeper never went off. At some point, other beepers in the room went off, and they told me to get on the radio and respond immediately. He says he doesn't know why his beeper wasn't working at the time. It's fair to say that the half hour, and then the filmmaker said, is it fair to say the half hour cost people from being saved? He said, no, it's not fair to say that. Though you did give a red light, didn't you? He didn't really answer that. The filmmaker then said, there was an article that said the SWAT team couldn't get in their vehicles quick enough to get to the scene because their keys were missing. Jerry said, I would think that this was made up. I've never heard that before. They printed some articles when I was running for political office, and they printed articles based on emotion, not based on fact. Jerry went on to be police chief and a 2-time San Diego mayor after this time. The filmmaker said, the Mexican community was crippled by this event. What would you like to say to them about this? And Jerry said, well, I learned more that day about disasters than I've learned in anything since. No matter how well you perform, when 21 people die, there's simply no way to say, I'm sorry. And to that I say, but maybe say it anyway.
Yes. Oh,
I know it was unprecedented. People, there's no book that says how you should approach or handle these things. To me, you can, both things can be true. You can say, we did not save those lives. We didn't have the tools and we're sorry.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Bare minimum.
To me, it's bare minimum. But now I think it is important, because I like to wear my psychologist hat all of the time, that we shift for a second to talk about who exactly was James Huberty. James Oliver Huberty was born on October 11th, 1942 in Canton, Ohio. It was a manufacturing town 50 miles south of Cleveland. His father, Earl Huberty, was a quality inspector at the Timken Roller Bearing Company plant, but he always yearned to be a farmer. When Huberty was 3, he contracted polio, and he suffered what his father described as, quote, spastic paralysis. James Huberty had to wear leather and metal braces on his legs, and when they finally came off, he was left with an odd gait that turned into a slight lifelong limp. It should be noted, I was curious about children that contract polio. I was like, what does that necessarily mean? And from what I have read, having polio is associated with a 40% risk of being hospitalized for a psychiatric disorder. 40%.
Wow.
It should also be noted that the likelihood of suffering a mental disorder was higher before the age of 45 if the person had contracted polio before the age of 7. And so we know that James Huberty had it when he was very young. So given this, it's an interesting thing to note.
Sure.
I will get into that more in a second. So one of Huberty's former teachers would remember that the other children would make cruel fun of the way Huberty walked as a child. When he was 7, his father, Earl, bought a 155-acre farm near Mount Eaton, about 20 miles from Canton. He bought it not so much to work it, but more as an investment and as a place to live while still working at the factory. However, his wife and James' mother, Isel, refused to live, quote, in the middle of nowhere, and refused to even go look at the farm. So instead, she left her husband and children and headed west as a Pentecostal missionary to Indian reservations. 34 years later, when James Huberty committed this mass killing, Isel was more than 70 and was still working as a street preacher in Tucson, Arizona. As far as I can tell, once she left the family, she never saw her family again or her children.
Wow.
So Earl moved James and his older sister Ruth to the farm and sent for his mother to keep house for them. Earl recounts that James was devastated when his mother left, saying, quote, I found him out by the chicken house and he was sobbing. He missed his mother. Mount Eaton was an area settled by Amish and Mennonite farmers, and those strict kind of clannish type folks didn't really love these new neighbors. At school, the other kids were very aware of James' broken home and teased him about it. His father described James Huberty as a lonely child with a dog named Shep as his chief companion. Then James Huberty discovered guns, and his lifelong obsession began. A family acquaintance remembered him as, and this is not my words, this is the acquaintance's words, James Huberty was a queer little boy who practiced incessantly with a target pistol. As a teen, Huberty tried out for a basketball team at Waynesdale High School, but for reasons no one can remember, it didn't work out. He did play chess, and his passion for guns continued to grow. He flunked one course in school, something called civil service, which was designed to teach students the practical necessities in life, like how to balance a checkbook. Years later, the teacher that failed him in that class would remark, "I can't believe I failed him and I don't remember him." But that kind of sums up his high school experience, as he was just kind of forgettable. He finished immemorably 51st in a class of 77 kids. He was also one of only 2 students who failed to have a picture taken for the class of 1960 yearbook. Meanwhile, he was getting very, very good with guns. He would load his own ammunition. He also experimented with something called hot loading, which is using a greater quantity of gunpowder to push a weapon beyond its muzzle velocity. One time, his grandmother found a mess that she mistook for dust, so she swept it up and tossed it in the furnace, but it was actually gunpowder, and she was singed when it, of course, flared up in her face. Huberty attended Malone College, a small Quaker school in Canton, where he studied sociology, but he then changed his mind about his career and went through the Pittsburgh Institute of Mortuary Science in Pennsylvania. He saw that mortuaries were making a lot of money, and he wanted to make a lot of money, said his father, Earl. In early 1965, Huberty married Etna Markland, whom he met at Malone College. The pastor who married them, Reverend David Lombardi of Trinity Gospel Temple in Canton, had immediate reservations about James Huberty. Lombardi said James had real inner conflicts. By the time he was dating Etna, he was atheistic and blamed God for taking his mother away from him. Lombardi went on to say that he regarded James as, quote, halfway intelligent, but when you dealt with him, you always felt a little uneasy about the way he harbored something inside. He was pent up, he was a loner, and he had kind of an explosive personality. Regardless, the couple started out well enough. Huberty landed a job at a funeral home in Canton, but that job did not last long. Don Williams, director of the mortuary, remembered that James was good at embalming, but bad for business, as he was very awkward in front of the people that would be grief-stricken customers in the parlor.
Right.
In Don Williams' opinion, Huberty simply did not like people or crowds. "I told him he was in the wrong business," he said. After 2 years in the funeral trade, Huberty left to pursue welding. In 1969, Huberty was hired at a public utility plant in Canton, managed by the engineering firm of Babcock and Wilcox. By this time, he and Etna had bought a roomy house in the town of Massillon, 10 miles west of Canton, and their future seemed secure. Huberty seemed to be reliable, quiet, and an excellent worker. He was able to run a steady welding bead and willingly took overtime. By the mid-70s, he was regularly earning between $25,000 and $30,000 per year, which would be around $120,000 to $145,000 by 2021, 2022 inflation numbers. That's US dollars. Even still, he seemed quite reclusive, and coworkers also noted his flaring temper. Sometimes coworkers would call him Puberty instead of Huberty, and it enraged him every time. He would not let it pass, and he would like to get even with them. He enjoyed showing up his coworkers. He was a very fast welder, and it was when he was angry at someone else on the assembly line that he would work at a very punishing pace in the hopes that this newfound enemy wouldn't be able to keep up with him. Some of his coworkers made friendly overtures, but Huberty struck them all as a sour person with a conspiratorial view of the world. He would rant about communism. He would warn people about nuclear war with Soviets. He had a long list of complaints about the government. The only coworker to get even close to a friendship with him was a man named James Aslanes. He also had a passion for guns, but not to Huberty's obsessive level. Aslanes recalled that Huberty would talk for hours about different types of pistols, rifles, and automatic weapons, and the damage that certain caliber bullets could inflict on a human body. Automatic weapons were the special fetish for Huberty, and if word got out that a coworker had an automatic weapon, he would seek them out and then offer to buy it from them, to the point that gradually it's said that his home was so full with small arms, shotguns, revolvers, semi-automatic pistols, and semi-automatic rifles, with some of which had kits to make them fully automatic, that there was just guns everywhere. Aslan said, quote, no matter where he was sitting or standing, he could just reach over and grab a gun. The weapons were literally everywhere, under couches, behind pictures. They were all loaded, all ready to fire, and none of them had their safeties on. According to one acquaintance, James would just sit inside his half-opened front door of his home with a loaded shotgun on his lap, as though he was waiting for an intruder to step through. In the neighborhood, the Hubertys were pariahs. The neighbors would remember their fears of the family's 2 German shepherds and the weapons they believed were kept inside the home. Neighborhood children would also share stories about witchcraft and the cult-like rituals that had been going on inside that house. Earl Huberty was so lonely after James and his sister Ruth left home that he eventually remarried. But James Huberty was bitterly opposed to his father remarrying and refused to acknowledge his new wife. This caused him to gradually grow more and more distant from his father. Huberty's first child, a daughter named Zelia, was born in 1972, soon after he became a welder, and his second child, another daughter, Cassandra, was born in 1974. He took his kids to see his father, Earl, only twice, which was fine with Earl's neighbors, as they remembered that when he would come to visit with Earl, he often arrived firing a pistol in the air from the window of his car. Huberty's pride and joy was a semi-automatic version of the Israeli-made Uzi assault weapon. One day, Huberty invited his friend, Aslanes, to fire the Uzi at a rolled-up carpet in his basement. Aslanes was aghast at this idea, the idea of shooting a rug indoors in town, so he declined. But he noticed that the rug was already riddled with bullet holes and that the bullet holes had gone through and chipped the concrete basement wall behind. Aslanes said, it was the little things that showed me that something was wrong with him. Aslane's discomfort grew when he and his 2 sons went shooting with James Huberty out in the country. Again, the Uzi was his favorite weapon, and Aslanes was shocked when Huberty started firing at rocks from which the slugs could easily ricochet back at the shooters. And it was at that point that he was never going to go shooting with Huberty again. Neighbors knew Huberty as a peculiar, short-tempered man who kept his blinds drawn and his doors triple locked. There were no trespassing signs and beware of dog signs all around. Many said that he kept a mental record of every setback, insult, or general source of frustration, whether it was actually real or just perceived, against him or his family. One woman, Betty Matechek, who lived down the street, said, quote, he was weird. I can remember him losing his temper and screaming like a madman. You had to be there to understand how strange he was. Still, he loved his dogs. He kept German shepherds. And as we know, he had a dog named Shep as a child, which makes me wonder if Shep was a German shepherd. I couldn't find anything to corroborate that, but
sure,
it feels likely. Many people say he liked those dogs more than he liked people. Neighborhood kids said he would give his dogs birthday parties with baked cakes and fried canned dog food so it would taste better for them. The dogs were also allowed to roam free in the neighborhood, and they would often get into garbage, annoy people, scare children, and even occasionally bite people. Neighbors were often calling the police about the dogs, and that would send Huberty into a rage. Now, as much as he loved those dogs, he also didn't let that overrule his want to keep an even score with others. For example, one day, one of his dogs jumped on an acquaintance's car and scratched the paint. So Huberty dragged the dog into the backyard and killed it on the spot. Then he remarked, there, I took care of it.
Jesus.
His affection for dogs also didn't extend to other people's dogs. One time a poodle pooped on his yard, and a neighbor named Cindy Straight saw him run out of his house with a gun in his hand about to shoot that dog when Cindy's father ran out and urged him not to. Huberty told Cindy's dad to never set foot on his property or he would kill him. Cindy said, quote, we didn't talk to them much after that. I wonder why.
Oh.
The Hubertys suffered a major setback in the winter of 1971 when the kitchen ductwork in their Massillon house caught fire just after Etna drove off to pick up James at work in Canton. When they got home, their house had literally burned to the ground. Only the foundation remained. The reason behind this was that Huberty kept large quantities of gunpowder in his basement, so when the fire hit, the house literally exploded.
Jesus.
Firefighters found window frames and drapery hardware across the street from the house. His beloved gun collection had melted into ruin in the fire, but Huberty and Etna rebounded quickly, buying a 3-story brick house that stood on an adjoining lot to them. And where their original house had been, they built a 6-unit apartment building that they managed themselves. Now, it's likely that Etna did most of the managing. She had become James' handler and liaison with the world. She managed the house, the children, the bills. She packed his lunches, got him ready for work, drove him to work, picked him up from work. His contact with people made him nervous, and when he was nervous, bad things would happen, so Etna tried to shield him as best she could. Huberty's temper was sudden and ferocious. He would slap his children and punch Etna when he got upset. Etna said generally it was just one hit. However, on one occasion, he went with her with such rage and violence, he, quote, messed up her jaw. He also pointed guns at her, and in a fit of rage, he also once held a butcher knife to the throat of his youngest daughter, Cassandra.
Jesus.
It's said that almost anything could set him off, but Etna would do what she could to avoid riling him up. For example, according to neighborhood gossip, the sight of bills arriving in the mail would drive him wild. So Etna would allegedly hide them in one of the dog houses until she could pay them while he wasn't around. She also had other ways of dealing with him, ways that were both ingenious and outwardly manipulative. She would claim that she could tell his future using playing cards, and he believed her. And when she would make recommendations about his business deals or other matters based on these supposed readings, he would usually go along with them. One time, a visitor watched Etna make an elaborate show of laying the cards out on a table twice, wearing an expression of great alarm. James watching over her shoulder, becoming more anxious by the second. He asked her several times, what did she see in the cards? And she finally told him that she saw that he was going to die violently before the age of 43, which is ironic because he did die violently at the age of 41. So maybe she was a better tarot reader than she thought she was, you know?
Yeah.
But
jeez,
she had some eccentric moments of her own. One day in September 1981, she was charged with 4 counts of aggravated menacing for pointing a fully loaded 9mm pistol at 4 women whose kids were, according to her, picking fights with her daughters. She pled not guilty to a reduced charge of disorderly conduct and paid a fine of $200 plus court costs. The pistol was returned to the Hubertys within the month, and it was one of the 3 guns used in Huberty's mass killing. Over the years, James' rage and isolation increased. His friendship with Jim Aslanes faded, and then Huberty began to hear voices. He told Etna that God and Jesus were consulting him about the government and President Carter. He also told an acquaintance that he had killed one of his dogs for speaking to him. He said the dog would speak to him through his eyes in ways that James could understand. In 1976, Etna started encouraging him to seek mental help. He refused, saying she was the crazy one. One summer day in 1982, 8-year-old Cassandra, whose nickname was Bobby, and Zelia, age 10, got into a backyard scuffle with 2 neighborhood children, Angie and Catherine Goodnow. The Goodnows said that the fight was over Bobby's habit of kicking people when she was irritated. They wrestled Bobby to the ground, and Zelia ran off to tell Huberty. Huberty waited 2 weeks to get his revenge. He arranged a retaliation around a backyard party for the kids. There was a handful of neighborhood kids assembled, and then, as he disappeared into the house, Bobby, in an obviously rehearsed move, stepped up to Angie and punched her full force in the eye. Art Goodnow, Angie and Catherine's dad, confronted Huberty about this, asking why he had clearly set up the girls to fight. Linda Goodnow, the mother, remembered Huberty's answer as, quote, I believe in paying my debts, both good and bad. A couple of months later, Catherine Goodnow was walking down the street when Bobby jumped from behind a bush and karate chopped her as Huberty watched. The Goodnows rushed to stop the fight that ensued, and Huberty called the police, but the police knew him very well at that point. And while they did respond to the call, they refused to arrest anyone, and Huberty was enraged. Linda Goodnow remembers that as soon as she and her family got home, their phone rang. She immediately knew it was Huberty. When Art answered the phone, Huberty said, quote, One of these days when you least expect it, I'm going to get you alone. Huberty never made good on the threat, but the concept of keeping scores even began to rule his life. When the Canton Insulation Company's work on his house didn't meet his expectations, for example, he and Aetna picketed their offices. To get them to stop, the company literally wrote off the rest of their bill. In 1982, something the press was calling the Rust Belt Recession caught up with Ohio and with Huberty. The public utility managed by Babcock and Wilcox shut down, and Huberty's job was terminated after 13 years on November 15th, 1982. That was when his life began to spiral. Aetna put their properties on the market right away. She felt like Huberty may have been having a nervous breakdown at the time. A fellow laid off worker, Terry Kelly, remembered Huberty saying that if he couldn't make a living for his family anymore, he was going to kill himself and, quote, take everyone with him. For Huberty, it seemed that the plant closing was evidence of the massive conspiracy operating against working people and against him. Selling the apartment house was a nightmare. Huberty expected to get $144,000, but he had to settle for $115,000. And when a deal fell through, he sued his real estate broker and threatened to burn his place to the ground. The whole thing was further proof to Huberty of the forces working against him. 6 months after his layoff, he did land a welder's job with Union Metal Manufacturing Company in Canton, but 5 weeks later, that plant abruptly closed as well, and Huberty sunk into deeper despair. On August 17th, 1983, his car was rear-ended. He sued the other driver, but it didn't end there. Since childhood, Huberty had suffered neck pains, and the accident had made them even worse. His hands also began to shake with a tremor, and sometimes he even had trouble holding glasses or bottles. This was obviously a crushing situation for a welder who has to have steady hands to do his job. This could have made him potentially unemployable in the field he had only known for well over a decade, but it should also be noted that those jobs were vanishing at the time, so it was kind of a double-edged sword. The voices in his head were coming more often, and the doomsday dialogues were leading Huberty's mind towards suicide. In front of Aetna one day, he raised a pistol to his head. Aetna says she grabbed his arm, pried his fingers off the gun, and left the room to hide the gun. When she came back, he was sitting on the couch crying. Within a year, Aetna says she regretted stopping him from taking his life that day.
Oy.
Yeah. Putting the house they were living in on the market was also tough on Huberty. He loved that house. He and Aetna had remodeled it room by room together, working side by side for months. They ended up selling it for $12,000 in cash, with the buyer taking over their $48,000 mortgage. Aetna would bitterly complain for some time that they lost $69,000 on the deal. So, what did they do next? Well, Huberty decided that they should move the family from Ohio to Mexico. It's not entirely clear what he hoped to achieve there, but he thought it would be cheaper to live, and he assumed there would be better interest rates in Mexican banks. Near the end of October 1983, the Hubertys went south with their car, their van, Huberty's huge gun collection, 1,000 rounds of ammunition, and his 1982 Honda motorcycle. They left most of their furniture and belongings in storage in Ohio. They landed in Tijuana, Mexico, which is, of course, a border town that is right across from San Ysidro, which is the southernmost suburb of San Diego, as we've spoken about before. Every day, Aetna would drive the kids back into the United States to go to school in San Ysidro. She and the girls took to their new setting in Mexico very well, but Huberty apparently hated it. He spoke no Spanish, and his paranoia was probably not helped by not being able to understand what people were speaking around him. His brain likely projected insults into their incomprehensible words. Aetna later said he felt lost, rejected, and hopeless. They lasted 3 months in Mexico before moving back into the United States. They crossed into San Ysidro and took a 2-bedroom apartment in the Cottonwood Apartments on Cottonwood Road. San Ysidro, which was described as a largely poorer district of San Diego, was, of course, just north of the Mexico-United States border, as we know, and in 1984 had a population of 13,000 people. Now, it has been said that Huberty had a distaste for immigrants, especially Mexicans. And Aetna apparently shared this distaste, but just wasn't as obvious about it. The fact that his family was the only Anglo-Americans within their apartment complex allegedly irritated him. and this made him notably ignorant to his neighbors. The other residents in the area liked Etna and the daughters well enough, but they were very scared of Huberty, as he would often shoot guns off of their balcony. Eventually, he saw an ad for a security guard training situation in the newspaper. It was for a federally funded program, and he was eligible because he was low income and currently unemployed. The class lasted several weeks, and his grades put him in the top of his 27-member class. A fellow classmate noted that he qualified as an expert shot on their first time out to the pistol range. On April 12, 1984, after an FBI check revealed that he had no criminal record, the California Board of Collections and Investigative Services issued a security guard registration card valid for 2 years to Huberty. Soon after, the San Ysidro police gave Huberty a firearms permit, allowing him to carry an exposed .38 or .357 Magnum on duty. 6 days after completing his course, Huberty went to a job interview at Bernstein Security Service of Chula Vista, a community near San Ysidro. He made a viscerally negative impact on the owner, Rudy Bernstein, who wrote no in literal 4-inch letters on Huberty's application form. Bernstein said Huberty had a bad attitude and talked about how he only wanted to work for the top security firms. Nonetheless, Huberty ended up getting a job with another Chula Vista security place and went to work as a guard at a condominium on the 8 p.m. to 2 a.m. night shift. Now, with money coming in, Etna had their furniture shipped from storage in Ohio, and Huberty was still beginning to deteriorate even further. The voices in his head were insistent. Etna would later tell police that Huberty believed the entire U.S. government was crooked, and that the voices would tell him that young women would go into the military to get sexually assaulted at Camp David. Apparently, the voices in his head didn't know that Camp David was a presidential retreat and not at all a military post.
Right.
But I digress. Around this time, Huberty ordered his first pair of camouflage pants from a magazine. They were cheap and thin, but he loved them. Huberty had tried to enlist during the Vietnam War, but he was turned down for what his father Earl says were, quote, physical reasons. Now he was telling Etna that he was, in fact, a war criminal. In the grips of his delusion, at one point, he approached a police car and told them he was a wanted war criminal. They checked with Border Patrol and the FBI, but there was no record of him, so they just sent him home. Oh. Etna tried to explain to him that he couldn't be a war criminal as he had never been to war, but he couldn't shake the feeling. He was obsessed with the military. He decided that he should probably share his firearms expertise with the Department of Defense, right? His knowledge of automatic weapons gave him ideas for amazing modifications, such as a device that could increase the gun's rate of fire. So he sketched out his ideas and sent them to the Pentagon. The Pentagon never wrote back, and Huberty was outraged that they ignored him. He felt that the military should be appreciating his excellent contributions. So he's still managing to hold on to this job. His family moves from the Cottonwood Apartments to a 2-bedroom apartment on Averill Road, which is near San Ysidro Boulevard, where, of course, from their building, they can see the McDonald's. Right. As before, the neighbors like Etna and the kids, but they were very repelled by Huberty. Some say he didn't seem to like children at all, not even his own. His children eventually admitted that their father would hit them, and sometimes they would have to sit outside of their apartment for hours while he and their mother, would scream at each other, and the whole apartment complex could hear these screaming arguments. One incident occurred when Zelia needed a new orthodontic device, and Huberty was infuriated by the expense, so he stormed into Zelia's bedroom with his Uzi and shouted, "Why spend money on the girl's teeth? She'll be dead anyway." It should be noted that at this time, Zelia was also having a recurring nightmare that she was being put into a casket. Anyway, then Huberty lost his job. His supervisors said he was too nervous and they fired him. It was July 10th, 1984. At this point, the voices in his head were babbling, saying the CIA was following him, that the military controlled the security company he had been working for, and that it was them who had ordered him to be fired. He believed that it had to do with the idea that the Pentagon was stealing his ideas. On Sunday, July 15th, 1984, Huberty acknowledged he may have a mental problem. On Tuesday, July 17th, Etna noticed him lurking by the phone and asked what he was doing. He said he was calling a mental clinic. He requested an appointment and they said they would get back to him. But hours passed with no return call. It was later determined that the person misheard him on the call and recorded his name as Huberty in the call log, as opposed to Huberty. This, along with the fact that he had never been hospitalized for mental health, wasn't on medication, and had a very composed demeanor at the time, meant that he had conveyed no sense of urgency with the call. So he was listed as a non-crisis inquiry. And he would be handled within 48 hours, which we know was too late. Irritated in the moment, Huberty drove off on his motorbike while Etna began calling any clinic she could find in the yellow pages to try and find the one that he had called to explain to them that this was an emergency. She wanted to find the one he called and tell them that he had guns and that he intended to kill. She actually did reach the right clinic, but because his name had been recorded incorrectly, she was told that no one named Huberty had made an inquiry, and so they couldn't help her. During this desperate conversation on the phone, she told the person at the clinic about her fears about her husband. But she did not take their advice, which was simply call the police. An hour or so later, Huberty returned home in a surprisingly good mood. Etna made pizza, which he ate with gusto. Then he took a nap. Then he quietly awaited the phone call that we know would never come. And late in the afternoon, the whole family went for a bike ride. Then the girls went off to babysit. There was a favorite movie on TV that night, so Huberty and Etna watched it. He fixed a snack of toasted raisin muffins for them, and Etna hoped that maybe this meant things were turning around. Wednesday morning, July 18th, Huberty was due in traffic court over a minor infraction. The whole family went to the appointment. The judge ended up letting him off as he was a newcomer to town at the time, and he alleviated him of the $75 charge. The judge said that they had come in between 8 and 8:30, but that Huberty was the last person to be seen around noon. And even though he had had a 3.5-hour wait, he wasn't upset at all. He described Huberty as pleasant and well-spoken. And I will say that judge is the only person that has described Huberty as pleasant.
Okay. Yeah.
They left court around noon and went to get lunch at a downtown McDonald's. Then they went to the San Diego Zoo and walked around for a bit. As they walked, Etna remembers Huberty telling her that his life was over. He rambled, as he often did, about the good ideas he had sent to the Pentagon. And in reference to the mental health clinic's failure to get back to him, he said, quote, "Well, society had their chance." Back home, Etna went to lie down, and Huberty came in wearing those very prolific camouflage pants and a maroon velour shirt with short sleeves and said to her, "I want to kiss you goodbye." She kissed him and asked him if he wanted to stay home, as she was going to put on dinner soon. "No," he said. He said he was going hunting humans. She felt that this was just more of his kind of odd babbling. Zelia, who was allegedly his favorite child, saw him leave and remembered him saying, "Goodbye, I won't be back." He was carrying something in a blue and white blanket. Zelia saw the barrel of the gun pointing out from that bundle, and we all know what happened next. After Huberty was killed, the National Institutes of Health asked that the San Diego coroner please examine James' brain for any abnormalities, a tumor, a scar, any tangible clue connecting to what had happened. But the coroner found that his brain was normal, healthy, with no perceived defects, which is a difference that we see from the frontal lobe trauma that has been consistent with basically every serial killer I have talked about on this show. But again, I will remind, this is not a methodical serial killer. This was a man who knew he had a mental illness, who reached out to get help, was not offered help, and then went on a mass spree killing, as opposed to continuing a serial killer's kind of methodical pattern over a long period of time. The day after the massacre, his wife Etna contacted the media. Carlos, one of the journalists we spoke about earlier, says she called and asked for him by name. He didn't know who she was, but she said she needed to tell her story, so she sat down with him and told him about how Huberty would shoot weapons in their basement, what was going on in his head, that he was anti-immigrant, especially Mexicans. Etna said she and their two daughters received several death threats in the weeks following the massacre, prompting them to relocate. For 9 months, all three of them would attend counseling sessions, and the girls would eventually enroll in school under false names. In July 1986, Aetna filed a lawsuit against both McDonald's and her husband's long-term former employer, Babcock and Wilcox. The civil suit, which was seeking $5 million in damages, asserted that Huberty's murder spree had been triggered by a combination of a poor diet and her husband working around highly poisonous metals without adequate protection over the course of many years. The suit specifically cited that no traces of either drugs or alcohol had been discovered in Huberty's body at the time of his autopsy, negating any possibility that his actions were influenced by those factors. But that the alleged accrual of the high levels of lead and cadmium discovered in his body at the time were most likely accumulated via an ongoing exposure to the fumes he had inhaled during 13 years that he had been employed as a welder without sufficient respiratory protection by Babcock and Wilcox. That and a combination of Huberty's exposure to these chemicals with his ingesting high levels of monosodium glutamate in the staple McDonald's food he was regularly consuming meant that he had induced delusions and an uncontrollable rage. The lawsuit was dismissed in 1987. Aetna also attempted to sell her narrative to a Hollywood studio. However, due to widespread public opposition, the proposal was shelved. When Aetna later reflected on her relationship with Huberty, she confessed, quote, "I always figured there was a strong chance he'd kill me one day." Aetna Huberty died of breast cancer in 2003. McDonald's and the San Diego police were sued for negligence by the victims. Both were cleared. The day after the massacre, reporters visited James Huberty's father, Earl, in Ohio. He said, quote, "Yesterday was the worst day of my life. I feel so sorry for those people." McDonald's temporarily suspended all television and radio advertisements in the days following the massacre. In an act of solidarity, arch rival fast food chain Burger King also temporarily suspended all forms of advertising. I think that's the best thing I've ever heard about Burger King, to be honest.
Well, yeah. I'm not going to say anything negative about Burger King. I have thoughts, but no. The point is, that's lovely.
It was
like
nice.
That's a nice solidarity.
Yeah. They didn't have to do that, but I think it was the right thing to do.
Yes.
Huberty's body was cremated on July 23rd, 1984. No official religious service was observed. His ashes were returned to Aetna and then later interred in his home state of Ohio. Because of the sheer number of victims, local funeral homes had to use the San Ysidro Civic Center to hold wakes for each victim. The local parish, Mount Carmel Church, was forced to hold back-to-back funeral masses in order that each of the dead could be buried in a timely manner. Several police officers who responded to the scene of the massacre suffered symptoms of PTSD as a result of the incident. On October 2nd, 1984, San Diego Police Chief William Colander held a press conference to disclose the results of the San Diego Police Department's inquiry into their response to the massacre. The results of this internal inquiry found that although the arrival of the SWAT team members was delayed by rush hour traffic, the police acted appropriately in their method of response. He finished his report by saying, "I believe the operation was handled the way it should have been handled." When asked about the motive behind Huberty's murder spree, he dismissed the notion of a racial motive, saying he didn't like anybody. Within 2 days of the massacre, the McDonald's had been refurbished and renovated, and they planned to open again as just another McDonald's. But following discussions between community leaders and executives, a decision was reached on July 24th that the restaurant would not reopen. It was demolished at midnight on September 26th. Following the closure and demolition, McDonald's donated the ground to the city. The land was sold in February 1988 to Southwestern College. And the area in front of the campus was intended to construct a permanent memorial to the 21 victims. That memorial was built in 1990 by former Southwestern student Roberto Valdez, honoring the victims of the massacre. It consists of 21 hexagonal white marble pillars, each varying between 1 and 6 feet, each bearing the name of a victim. He said that the 21 hexagons represent each person that died, and they are different heights representing the variety of ages and races of the people involved. They are bonded together in the hopes that the community in a tragedy like this will stick together like they did. That memorial is still there. McDonald's also announced a commitment of $1 million to a survivors fund, with the widow of McDonald's founder Ray Kroc, Joan Kroc, also adding a personal contribution of $100,000 to assist with burial costs, financial aid for relatives of the deceased, and counseling service for survivors. The total of donations received by this fund would exceed $1.4 million. Amidst impromptu protests from some San Ysidro residents and donors, Etna Huberty did receive the first payout from this fund. Some believe she and her daughters, of course, were victims too.
Huh. Okay, well, I mean, we'll get into this later, but
yeah. Yep.
Huh. Okay. Well, look, that was both enlightening and horrifying.
Yeah, it really is.
So I think that this is probably a good time to take another break. So hit the can, stay hydrated, and we will be back to finish this off on True Crime and Cocktails.
1, 2, 3.
All right. Well, welcome back. Before the break, Lauren was giving us a very detailed background on mass murderer James Huberty. So I'm going to throw it back to Lauren to bring us on home.
Yeah, the last thing I wanted to say was this, and I think that this was something that was, well kind of demonstrated in the documentary when they said there was one shooter and 175 police on the scene. The police took 5 shots. The shooter took 251. I think, and this is my own statement, there has to be a middle ground between this or the Uvalde case and Breonna Taylor's case, for example. There just does. But I would also like to end this whole episode just talking very briefly about the victims, because we've talked a lot about him, and I think it would be nice to just remember those who lost their lives. Arisdelchi Vargas was 31. She shielded her friend Guadalupe Del Rio, who survived. Lawrence Herman Versluis was 62. His retirement party was planned for that week. Michelle Carncross was 18. Claudia Perez was 9. Elsa Herlinda Borboa was 19. Hugo Luis Velasquez was 45. Neva Denise Kane was 22. Paulina Aquino Lopez was 21. Victor Rivera was 25. Jose Ruben Lozano Perez was 19. Omar Hernandez was 11. Miguel Victoria was 74. Aida Victoria was 69. Maria Elena Colmenero was 19. Gloria Lopez was 23. Margarita Padilla was 18. Blythe Regan Herrera was 31. Mateo Herrera was 11. David Flores was 11. Jackie Reyes was 18. And her son Carlo Reyes was 8 months.
Jesus.
Reporting for True Crime and Cocktails, I'm Lauren Ash.
Oh, God. Oh, God.
I know, it's a lot. I know.
Yeah.
And I know I kind of blew through that second act, but it was just trying because there was so much information that I wanted to hit.
There's a lot. There's a lot. I mean, look, I took a few notes.
Please.
They're it's going to be in chronological, obviously, but God. One of the first things you said when you were talking about him doing this, the shooting, was that he went to the parking lot, he locked his car.
That bumped me too.
And then went in.
Yep.
Why did you lock your car?
I know.
What's up with that?
I know.
What a weird detail. Unless it's just a force of habit, it's a weird detail to lock your car if you went there knowing that you were like, yep.
Especially when he basically told his wife and child, like, not coming back. This is it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
It's such a weird thing. Also, is that the same McDonald's they ate at? Or they ate at another one because it was closer to the courthouse, right?
Different one. Yeah.
Okay. I assumed. Oh God. The woman, I believe you said it was Neva.
Yes.
Who ran towards him, just instinct. I mean, my God, I would love to believe that I would be that brave, but I just don't think I could be. His quote of "I've killed 1,000 and I'll kill 1,000 more." I just assumed this would later on come into the story that he was in fact a war veteran.
Nope.
And it turns out he was not. The McDonald's employee becoming a cop because of the incident is lovely, but also so sad that
I know
that's how it had to happen for him. I mean, good on him for seeing what happened and wanting to do that, but good God. The first police being dispatched to the wrong McDonald's.
Mm-hmm.
Simple enough mistake, but also to be like, oh, well, that wasn't a big deal. That didn't cause anything. It's like, well, yeah, I guess that you're right. It didn't cause any harm sending you to the wrong location since you went to the right location and then just stood there.
And did nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. Officer Steve, I don't remember his last name, but holding a hand on the wound while driving. Oh, bless Officer Steve.
I know.
The cop story changing, the gun and the gunman's position. It's sketchy if he's going to keep changing it. Especially because that's the same guy who was like, I'm not affected by this.
And that's a red flag to me. Because everybody else, even like the SWAT commander, Jerry, he's even said like things that admitted, not in a perfect way, but he said things that are just like, yeah, you know what? It wasn't perfect. You know what I mean? Like he's at least had some acknowledgement even on a small scale. But yeah, it's the fact that his story is the one person's story that consistently changed. And he's the one that's like, I'm fine. I just feel like if he did have that military rifle and he was trained to use that rifle, and that shooter came out of that restaurant, given that there is dead people everywhere at that point, I mean, I'll be bold and just say, like, take the shot. I'm not a gun person. I'm not a, whatever person, but like, take the shot. Okay. Yeah. Is it a risk about people inside? I understand that. I don't know. It's just, well, like they were dead anyway, like according to them, well, they were dead anyway. And it's like, well, if that's true, then why would it have made it worse to take the shot? Try and take them out.
Yeah.
If they were apparently dead anyway, and it doesn't matter, then why wouldn't you try and take them out?
Anyway. To say that you saw him and you saw him with a weapon.
Yep.
And there were bodies on the ground. And your thought was, well, I don't know what he's done. Be smarter than that.
Well, yeah, like because it just rings false, right?
Yes. He's trying to take the blame away from himself and be like, well, it wasn't me.
Yeah.
And it's oh God. 11-year-old Omar crying for his mother. I can't even begin to get into how devastating that is. Huberty just throwing garbage and food at the victims. The fact that he fatally shot someone and then shot them again 45 minutes later. The fact that he got so bored, he just started like reshooting people. The fact that he had time to do that. Oh God. To the people who were laying there playing dead, how long did that 77 minutes feel to them?
Eternal.
I guarantee it felt longer than 77 minutes.
100%.
And also, where's their trust in the police going to be after that?
Gone. I also like that the police were like, well, when they came out, they weren't running to the police. They were looking for their loved ones. And I was like, because also they don't trust you. You left them in there for almost an hour and a half.
Yes.
I don't think that it's only about that. I don't think they're running towards you because why would they? I don't know that I would.
Yes. And also because they're not concerned about you or themselves.
Yep.
So they're not going to go to the cops. They want to know that, they want to see loved ones. That makes sense. They're concerned about them.
Yep.
They don't give a shit about you.
No.
Oh my God. The fact that he put on music to just listen to while he was shooting.
Slightly dance around.
Yeah. 251 shots is roughly 3 every single minute. And that may not seem like a lot, but every single minute, and I know he took brief minutes of a break and whatever, but that's insane. The people who survived this, God, how long did they hear bullets?
Some of them,
like,
I don't, well, they never recovered. You know what I mean? Like, it's like the people who did, they push it down and they don't want to look at it. And then other people, they just don't. Like, that's such a huge part of your life. And that's why I think I was like, I want to be very pragmatic in how I present this, because it's like, this is real.
Yeah.
This is real. And again, it paralleled Uvalde to me in some ways, which is current day, where it was like, look, we're not suggesting that the way to handle everything is to let the police go into every situation and just start blindly shooting. No. But there's some times where it's like, I'd like you to try and intervene. I would like you to try and intervene. Yeah. Because if we're not doing it at those times, then what are you doing?
Yes.
175 police officers, one shooter. Those 175 police officers, there was 5 shots taken, and that one shooter took 251.
That's,
I mean, it's
also the fact that the emergency exit was locked at all times. I can't. I know it doesn't really relate, but years ago, I won't name the place, but I was working at a specific place here in town. I had gone on maternity leave. I worked there for, I think, like a year or so. And then I left and was gone for about a year for maternity leave. And I had just started coming back, and when I left, I was like supervisor position. So I had a key to the building because I had to lock up at night or open up when I went in first early in the morning. When I came back, the manager said to me, you've been gone so long. How do we know we can still trust you? I don't feel like I can give you a key to the building anymore.
No.
So when you work an early shift, you're going to come into the building and you have to have the door locked. I'll have to lock you in. And the people who owned the place went, well, it's not safe for her to be in a locked building that she can't get out of. And they were like, well, what if there's like a fire, or what if there's something? And the boss's reaction was, well, what am I supposed to do? Just give her a key? And I'm like, I had a key for so long before I left. So in the middle of this conversation we were having, I got up and just walked out.
Good for you.
I just went home and I didn't go back. And they called my house repeatedly, being like, talking to my parents, and they were like, she left. I don't get what's going on. Like, what's happened? And I just never went back.
Good for you.
And I was like, you just suddenly stopped trusting me.
Because I don't know how baby?
Yeah. And that's the other thing. It's like, at this point, now that I've had a child, I want more than anything to keep this job. So why would I do something to fuck that up? My point is, it's not safe.
No, and it's not like you went away because you went to jail for stealing or something. Like,
correct.
It's like, that's a different scenario where it's like, we're going to give you a chance, but we're nervous. It's like, you just took time off to have a baby, as is anybody's fucking right.
Yeah.
How dare they? That's disgusting.
Oh, and that wasn't even the worst thing she did. She was a terrible boss. I'll say it, which is why I won't say publicly where it was.
Of course.
But my point was, the idea that the emergency exit was locked. It's like, why?
And then they couldn't get out because they were worried about them stealing. Like, first of all, stealing what? Stealing what? McDonald's, the food that costs pennies?
Yeah.
Give me a break.
Yeah. Oh, I can't. It's the lack of trust between an employer and an employee that's putting the employee in a dangerous position.
100%. So, and also you have to have emergency exits.
Yes. Oh my God. Oh God. Oh yeah. Miguel, being the first officer who was on the scene, claiming he just didn't know the man was shooting anyone. I can't. There was so much physical evidence of that happening. I don't know what he blocked or what, but good God. Police claiming that most people were dead within the first 10 minutes. Sounds like police just trying to downplay what they could have done, but just didn't. It's kind of what it is. The fact that one person was shot 48 times. And God.
Again, I didn't have time to get into, we need to get a medical examiner just on speed dial.
Yes.
But I didn't have time to get into it. But I was like, if her body was completely decimated from bullets, I would love to know what the process is of determining exactly the time of death. Because I would argue that the diagnosis should be inconclusive. I don't think that if your body is completely, like, your head is basically detached from your body because you've been shot 48 times. I don't know that they can say beyond a shadow of a doubt, beyond reasonable doubt, that they know the exact time of death. I could be wrong.
Yeah.
My guess is saying, like, I don't know that you can say that it was like, well, she was already dead and it wasn't those additional however many shots. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, to me, it was just like, stop defending, stop it.
Yeah. Oh,
and again, the fact that the defense that they're making is like, well, they were all dead already. So what does it matter? I can't.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it's all just horrifying, is what it is. Then you got into talking about James Huberty. His mother leaving their family, and then him blaming God for taking his mother away. And I want to say the only person you had to blame really was your mother, because she chose to go. She didn't have to, she chose to, but you couldn't blame her.
Nope.
Because you loved your mother so much, I suppose. But he didn't like people. He didn't like crowds. He loved getting even, and he loved guns. What a horrific combination all around.
Yep.
The home having guns everywhere, none with a safety on, is horrifying to me. And then my stomach just turned at the thought of someone frying dog food.
That made my stomach turn too.
The smell that I can only imagine is horrific. I can't think of it. The sign of bills enraged him. I mean, look, I have so much compassion for his wife having to walk on eggshells to live in that house.
Yes.
And so I understand the things she did, like hiding the bills so he wouldn't see them, so that he wouldn't take it out on her, that sort of thing. But I mean, to skip ahead just briefly, while I have compassion for her and her children, and I feel they shouldn't have gone through what they did,
of course,
I also don't believe they should have been the first payout from this survivor fund. I'm not saying they shouldn't have gotten any. They shouldn't have been the first.
I thought it was like a nice gesture that someone was like, they were victims in this too, because I think people forget that sometimes the family of the perpetrator can be victims too.
Yes.
Totally agree. But I agree with you. It was like, we should probably serve the people who were in that restaurant or around that restaurant first. Plain and simple.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, God. Oh, the fact that you said he was going hunting humans is one of the more chilling things I've ever said. The fact that, or that you've ever said, the fact that he specifically called for help. And again, it was a small error of writing down the wrong name. Like, it was a small error of dispatching police to the wrong McDonald's. Just these small errors that made such a big difference.
Yep.
And also, when a woman is calling and saying, like, my husband is going to kill. I know you're not in the greatest position to do something, but to be like, oh, well, actually, he didn't call. Okay. But if you think he didn't, fine. But can you help him somehow? I know in that moment, no, they wouldn't have been able to really do anything. But it's just, oh, God, I don't even know.
And I think that that's part of the reason why I was like fascinated by this case was that he was somebody who recognized that he wasn't okay. And that's something that we haven't really heard a lot of, I feel like, doing this show.
Right.
I would almost say that I can remember ever. I don't know that I ever remember a case where somebody was like, I'm mentally unwell, please help me, didn't get help, and then did a mass murder. I think this is the first one of those we've kind of covered.
Right.
So that was really interesting to me. That it was somebody who, again, like, and to me, it's because as if you're an OG listener of the show, you know, I've done serial killer specials. Serial killers are fascinating to me because of the psychology of it.
Of course.
And the thing that we've learned, again, one of the correlations is this frontal lobe trauma. And then this is somebody who didn't have that frontal lobe trauma.
Right.
His brain was not harmed. But then there's the addition of having polio as a very, very young child. And that it does kind of can cause these kind of severe reactions in people. And again, the fact that he had this moment where he was like, I'm not okay, I need help. But then, and listen, I'm not trying to vilify his wife either, but they did say to her, like, you should call the police. And she didn't. And I get it for a multitude of reasons why she did it. I get that. But it just makes you wonder what would have happened if the phone call that he had made had been taken more seriously. If she had maybe made one more phone call, it makes you wonder because just so many lives were lost. And so many of the survivors also, their lives, in a sense, were lost because they've been destroyed by this incident, you know?
Oh, yeah. Nobody who was there that day is the same.
No. No.
I can't even begin to imagine. The thing that fascinated me in all of this, and I love that this is specifically what I'm focusing on, the fact that after it all, his wife sued McDonald's.
I know.
Sue the police. I get that.
Police.
I get
Sue
that.
Police.
But you're gonna sue the place where the attack occurred.
And also because she felt he had eaten so much McDonald's, it drove him to do this.
I just assume he chose there because it was so busy. And he wanted the most carnage.
And it was close. It was 200 feet from his house. He didn't have to go far. Like, to me, it's like, yeah, I don't know. I don't think that it was because it was McDonald's. I think it was because it was there.
Yeah. And I can't. I'm also, it's the fact that they took the time to refurbish it and then turned around and tore it down.
Yep.
Maybe, and I am not an expert here, maybe they should have talked about whether or not it should be torn down first before bothering to refurbish it.
Well, the good news is that there's lots of video footage before it got refurbished, so it's all viewable in my brain for the rest of my life.
Oh God, I'm sorry.
And no, it's totally fine. I'm not complaining. It's my cross to bear, which is far less than any of those people's cross to bear. So I will hold that space for them.
And look, I get it. Sometimes I close my eyes and I see the JonBenet autopsy photos.
Well, just know that there's so many dead children in this one, and there's so much footage of the dead children. I'm not saying it's JonBenet, but I feel like now we've really evened out. I've met you.
Yes.
I've met where you're at. Because I've seen more images of dead children in the past week than I've seen prior. And I don't ever want to see again.
Sure.
Or, you know.
I get it. Yeah. This job sticks with you.
It does.
I mean, there is something.
Makes you want to shower for sure.
It does. There was something from, I'm gonna say, I think season 2-ish. There was an episode that I did where I told you I read the worst thing I've ever read, but I wasn't going to tell you because I didn't want you to have to carry it with me. Yeah, it's still the worst. And that's the thing. It really really sticks with you. And that's just from doing it from this side. So I just don't buy a police officer who was in the thick of it. And the first one to arrive at that scene to be like, oh yeah, I actually, it didn't affect me at all. I don't buy that at all.
Not overall. A huge part of me wants to, again, wrap him in a blanket and be like, it's okay to talk about how you really feel. The problem for me where it breaks down is the inconsistent story. That's where I'm like, I have compassion. Absolutely. But I need you to get your story straight. Because right now it's feeling like there's something shady happening. I'm speculating and alleging.
It's never a good sign that somebody starts changing their story and that it doesn't stay the same. That's automatically a red flag, especially if you maybe so many years apart. I don't know, but it's such drastic differences from I had one single gun to he had a rifle, I guess it was he had the rifle. And then years later it was, well, I only had my handgun. It's like, how do you forget that rifle was there? So
and if the truth is that his memory has changed, if the truth is that he remembers it differently now, that speaks even more so to how this person needs mental health resources, because it's completely possible he could remember it completely differently because it's hugely traumatic, and it could be a PTSD situation or where his brain is fractured into creating delusions. All of that is possible. But again, it just really stuck out to me as like, this is not great.
I mean, it makes sense that, especially in a case of he had a weapon that he could have used to do something. And so he's told himself since then, there was nothing I could do. I had a handgun. He had multiple weapons. What was I going to do? So he's just told himself that so many times so that he doesn't feel guilt over it. Yep. And I'm not saying he should feel guilt over it. I'm just saying there's no way that didn't change you in some way.
No, and I'm not saying I don't want anyone to like live in torture. I don't want him to live in guilt. What I'm saying is just acknowledge. Don't just it to me is the deflection that's like weird and makes it feels uneasy, where it's like, well, now it feels like you're hiding something because your story has changed and it feels like you're deflecting from the truth. If you just said, you know what, it was horrific. There's no way that can't change you as a person. I've done my best to move on. I would never have dug any further. I would have been like, that sounds reasonable. It's the fact that this person was like, I'm not traumatized. I'm proudly untraumatized. And that's why I was like, again, being very
stand down
in how I presented some of this, because I was like, really? Oh, I'm so happy for you. Let's talk about the other people that don't have a choice with what they live with.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I fully agree. That's what I'm going to say. I'm also going to say, Lauren Ash, thank you for your research. What a horrifying and heartbreaking journey.
Yep.
You are a champion for wading through that research. And on behalf of all the True Crew and myself, I say, we appreciate you.
Thank you.
And thank you, dear listeners, for taking this journey with us. We appreciate your support. As always, give us a follow on the socials. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at True Crime and Cocktails, or on Twitter at Not Detectives. And if you're looking for more time with us, because why wouldn't you? No time is ever enough. Is that? Yeah, that works. Mm-hmm. The point is patreon.com/True Crime and Cocktails. We have episode polls. We have live Q&As. We post stuff sometimes there before we post it here, because that's just what Patreon gets. And so if you're looking for more, Patreon is where to go. But if you're looking for merch, the only place to get it, truecrewmerch.com. I'm telling you, there's Halloween merch. There's Bert and Larry Halloween merch. It's a laugh riot. I'm going to tell you. I was there while she created it. It was a beautiful thing to witness in real time. to watch the beautiful madness that happened in that moment. And where else was I going? Oh, fuck. I barely do this, so give me a break. Lauren, would you like to tell the people about our next episode?
On the next True Crime and Cocktails, Charles Morgan.
Oh, that would be, I believe, our August Patreon poll.
Yes.
Again, over on patreon.com/True Crime and Cocktails, you can vote once a month what episode it's going to be. Next episode, Patreon told us Charles Morgan, and we're going for it. Lauren, would you like to say goodnight to the people?
Good night, Hamburglar.
I was going to say Dave Grohl, but now, good night, Birdie.